agenda is the minutes from May 22nd.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend approval of the minutes of May 22nd as amended.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. The next thing is that at this time, we open up the public comment. If there's anyone here that wants to talk about anything that's not on our agenda, now's the time. Okay, doesn't look like there is. Thank you very much. Next is approval not required plans. We don't have any, is that correct? There's no A&Rs tonight. And at 6:30, it's a public hearing. Do we have any notices, Paul?
Yes. Public meeting notice was issued on May 25th, June 1st, and June 8th, 2018. In addition, one abutter was notified by return receipt but was not returned.
Okay. I have a relationship with the applicant, and I need to recuse myself. Pat, you want to take the hearing?
Okay, for the applicant. This is, the applicant is Paul R. Dupay Jr., special permit application to adjust the boundaries of lots 31, 32, and 33, Land Court Plan 23937G, located at Adamancet Road, East Falmouth.
Good evening, members of the board. I'm Bob Ament. I'm a Falmouth attorney. I represent the applicant, Paul Dupay. Beginning in about 1937, Paul's grandfather, Norman E. Dupay, began acquiring property on the west side of Coonamessett Pond. The Book of Falmouth refers to him as a Boston wool magnate, and in Falmouth he had a cattle ranch, a dairy farm, and eventually the properties turned to mainly residential use. By 1950, a number of houses had been built along Coonamessett Pond, and 3 of those houses are the subject of the hearing tonight. And it's these 3 houses, each of which was built in 1950, each of which is a 3-bedroom heated but seasonal home because it's not a lot of insulation. The area in question is interesting, and it relates to the appropriateness of what we're asking. I brought along with me this plan, which dates from around 2002. It was prepared in connection with the town's proposed acquisition of some 75 acres, which abuts the property we're talking about. And on this plan, I've indicated, again, the 3 houses that we'd like to each have on their own lot. Those 3 which are in red, and I don't know if you can see it, but the acreage bought by the town of Falmouth extends to Sandwich Road, and then behind the property, the Falmouth Jewish Congregation and the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, then along Hatchville Road, and then abuts the, I think it's the Sousa Wildlife Refuge in this area, and then runs back along Adamancet Road. So all of these houses on this part of Adamancet Road and on this part of Adamancet Road were owned by the Dupay family. And now Mr. Dupay owns these pieces over here. So there's 75 acres or so of town-owned open space. Some of it is used as the playing fields on Sandwich Road, but it makes the properties in question extremely private. Now, Adamancet Road was laid out in the 50s or beforehand, because these houses date from 1950. And Adamancet Road is shown as a 40-foot wide way on a 1955 land court plan, and again shows on subsequent plans which made divisions of the property along Adamancet Road in 1981 and in 1982. I submitted to you with the application a copy of those land court plans, which show that the planning board was endorsing plans, approval not required, in the 1980s. And that's significant because our zoning bylaw has a provision that says if you have land that was in common ownership as of 1981 and on a road which was constructed according to the applicable regulations, which it had to have been determined to be eligible for approval not required endorsement of lots, then you can apply to the planning board for a special permit to adjust the lot lines so that you have at least 60,000 square feet per lot in this district. Now, this is actually an agricultural A district. An agricultural A district would only require 45,000 square foot lots. And so the lots with the houses on it were conforming when they were created in 1981. It wasn't until a few years later, 1986, that the Water Resource Protection District was adopted for the Coonamessett Well, and that made the minimum lot size 80,000 square feet. So the lots in question actually were conforming when they were created. One question which I don't know the answer is, why didn't they put the two houses on separate lots back then when they could have? But the fact is that they didn't. And so we still have today one house over here, which is on its own lot of about 75,000 square feet. And these two houses are on the same lot. This is the existing property line. And that lot exceeds 2 acres. And it has two 3-bedroom houses on it. So we're asking the planning board to allow under 240-66 C6 the redivision of 3 lots, this lot, and this lot, into 3 lots. We have 3 existing lots. We will end up with 3 lots, each of which will have a house on it. And in this case, there already are 3 houses, so there's no increase in the use, merely by the creation of these lots. As indicated in the correspondence to the board that accompanied the application, I think we meet all of the standards for an approval of a special permit under that section of the bylaw. There are no town wells or private wells within 300 feet of any of these lots. We're not proximate to any of the coastal ponds. Being in Hatchville, of course, that would require a study as to nitrogen loading. We will be eliminating the nonconformity of there being 2 houses on one of these lots. And we won't be creating a new nonconformity because the zoning bylaw allows the creation of these 60,000 square foot lots because they equal at least 75. That is, the average lot size is 60,000, and that's the test. You can have a lot that's less than 60,000 under that section of the bylaw, but the number of building permits, when divided by the number of lots, by the area of the total area being redivided, does not exceed 75% of the otherwise required minimum lot size in the district. So we do meet that. The lots will be more valuable with 1 house on each of them. They can be more easily sold without resort to condominium or some other strategy. The intent of Mr. Dupuy, who owns and lives in a house over in this area is to keep this as a guest house. He intends to sell this and perhaps this lot as well to his brother Richard, who presently resides seasonally in this structure. So the property is to still remain in the family, although one lot may be sold. It's important, I think, that in a decision of the planning board, the status of these lots and going forward is recognized. That is, we have a non-conforming situation, at least with respect to two of these houses, because they are two houses on a single lot. As I said, we're eliminating that non-conformity. Each of the houses will be on a lot that can be allowed pursuant to this special permit process by the planning board, because they average more than the 75% of 80,000 square feet. I believe that makes the lots conforming with the special permit, and that the houses would have that status as conforming. That's important because if one's going to change or rebuild a house on either of the lots that will still be less than 80,000 square feet, this lot will actually exceed 80,000 square feet. But these lots, one will be 45,000 and one will be, I think it's 58,000 square feet. If they were changes to a non-conforming structure, we were putting them on separate lots. Some case law, under different circumstances, suggests that those houses would lose their protection as non-conforming houses. And we want to make sure that that's clearly not what's happening here. We're asking the planning board to approve the division of lots just as if these were going to be vacant lots, and indeed if we tear down a house they would become vacant lots with the right to build a new house without restriction on it. I hope that's clear, at least to the town planner. We don't want to be creating a problem. If you have questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Does anybody on the board have any questions? John?
Regarding lot 63, proposed lot 63, will it have its own driveway, or is it still going to have a shared driveway?
The intention would be to share that driveway, I believe. And as you know, shared driveway for two lots is permitted by right in Falmouth. It doesn't become a common driveway needing a special permit until you have three lots served by a single driveway. Given the topography, it's simply better for the environment to not create a new driveway, which could get closer to the wetlands. And particularly if Richard Dupee should purchase both of these, it makes perfect sense for him to use a single driveway under the circumstances. So it's been like this for going on 70 years, and we wouldn't be changing that. I do note that there is a separate driveway, as you can see in this area, that extends to the house on proposed lot 61. There's also a garage here. It's by special permit from the Board of Appeals, because it's in the front yard, was allowed to be rebuilt fairly recently. There was also a special permit back in 1990 that allowed this expansion of the house shown to be on lot 62. Anyway, the answer is that we would like to continue to share that driveway. And given the size of these lots, the privacy of Adamancet Road, which, by the way, was paved by the Air Force in connection with the installation of municipal water along Adamancet Road back around 1997, because of the plumes made the drinking water unsuitable. Anyway, we would share that driveway.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any other questions.
Is it because these structures are pre-existing that you only need to meet 75% of the required 80,000 square feet per lot?
No, well, it's because of particular provision in the zoning bylaw, it's 24066C6. I
Yeah.
actually set it forth at the beginning. I put the entire section at the top of the page
Yeah.
attached to the application. And it does, yeah, I mean, you wouldn't be using this bylaw provision if you already had conforming lots, obviously.
Right.
This is the situation where you had lots that may have been legally laid out that are now undersized. And basically the adoption of the Water Resource Protection District and the expansion of it to include the Coonamessett Well in 1986 almost didn't quite double, but
Yeah.
increased by 50% the required lot size. And these lots, that lot became, the lots were undersized. Anyway, we're allowed to divide the property, and we're adding what was lot 31 to give us some area, though we're not counting the wetland portion of it, that helps us to meet the, to get to the 60,000 square feet. We actually at around 62,000 square feet average lot size of upland, not counting wetland.
So I did interpret that right, that it was because these were pre-existing. These,
Everything there is pre-existing and
Yeah.
legal, including the fact that there are two houses on a single lot. The town didn't prohibit two houses on a single lot until 1959, and we know that these houses were built before then because they actually show on the 1955 land court plan, and the assessors tell us they were built about 1950, all of them.
okay. Thanks, that clears it up for me.
Paul?
Two questions, please. The addendum and special permit application you have here
Yes, sir.
refers to various lots, 6 and subdivided in 31, 32, and then 16 and so forth. How does that relate to these lots here as numbered?
Well, first of all, that's history, and I actually made copies of the land court plans I referred to. Now, actually, those were attached to the application. But here's lot 6. This is a 1955 plan. It shows the 3 houses. I've highlighted each of them in yellow so you can see. And the significance of this includes one, Adamansett Road was already in existence. Adamansett Road was in existence. And then the next plan you have is the 1981 land court plan. Again, it's showing that, actually, let me just check the date on that. That's a January 20, 1982 plan, when the present lots were created. And you can see that lot 31, 32, and 33 were created by that 1982 plan. The date of that plan is prior to the date in the zoning bylaw by which the road that the lots are on has to have been constructed in order to qualify under the section which we've applied for. So it just so happens we have a plan dated just in January, the effective date in the bylaw being April of 1982, that basically proves that at that time the planning board reviewed Adamansett Road and approved the A&R division of those lots. So to that extent, that's where lot 6 comes from. And as land court property is divided, the land court assigns in a numerical order a new number, starting with 1, going up. So plans, initially the earlier plan has a lot 6, then there's a lot 16, you'll see. The present lots are in the 30s. These lots are going to get assigned new numbers by the land court, and we believe they'll be 61, 62, and 63. So I hope that explains why I submitted the plans.
The second point is request to ask Mr. Bunker to put on these locust plan. we've talked to him several times past. If we have a plan of land, we're gonna have a locus on the location of where it is. It's not on this drawing up there.
I think you're absolutely right that having a locus plan would be helpful. That's one of the reasons I brought this plan tonight, when I realized there was no locus plan there.
We've mentioned it previously, so he's aware of it.
I'm sorry, I'll try to be more cognizant of it and bug him for you.
And so the staff, by the way, because we've talked about that before, my apologies.
He does wonderful work, by the way,
Yeah.
but we could get it better.
Have to keep these consultants honest.
Charlotte, you have nothing?
I have not.
Okay. Anything further? I'm all set myself. Does anyone in the public have any comment on this?
Just before you get done, I had one question.
Okay.
Considering the point that Mr. Drewley brought up about the driveway crossing one lot to another, do you think that future owners would benefit from showing an easement across that lot for that driveway that crosses for future transactions when they go out of the family?
Yes. That is when there should be an easement when Lot 63 is conveyed. If Lots 63 and 62 were conveyed to the same person, and the ownership was the same, then an easement would be a nullity. So I'm not sure the answer is that there needs to be an easement shown at this time. Putting an easement like that on the plan is a good idea as a reminder to the conveyancer, perhaps years later when they convey Lot 63, to be sure to grant an easement. I don't think needs to be a concern of the planning board. If you really feel there should be an easement shown, I don't really have an objection, but I will tell you that an easement can't exist and can't be granted until the lots are in separate ownership, and I don't know when that will occur. I think that's a conveyancing issue, something the land court would be interested in. We're showing the driveway itself, so I don't think there's any, nobody's going to be misled by it. Again, if if it was a condition and the board felt necessary, we can do it. I don't think it's a necessary for the same reasons I've said.
Well, I think about posterity and the guy who follows me, because I'm the guy who followed somebody else who knew everything, and so I'm the new guy. So I am very sensitive to what happened in the past. And in the court case of this, we've got records from houses built in the 1950s and reams. But I just think about if it's instructive to the plan, and you need to have a locus on your plan anyhow, it would be seemingly low-hanging fruit for your engineer to put on the plan easement to be conveyed upon.
We could do that. An alternative would be to simply include as a condition of approval that, so that it's in writing, on the record, in the land court, because the special permit decision will need to be filed there, that specifies that if Lot 63 is conveyed separately from Lot 62, an easement must be granted.
So both will be recorded, but oftentimes people look at a plan and not the decision. So I think that it's sort of a belt and suspenders from my perspective.
I'm going to concede that point, because I've already said what I think about it. I also think it shouldn't be, I'm not going to get hung up on it. That's fine.
Okay. Other questions?
No.
Okay, then I would look for a motion to close this hearing
So moved.
and take it under advisement.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded that the hearing is closed, and we are going to take it under advisement. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Remember what the last motion was?
The hearing is closed, and we are taking it under advisement.
Thank you.
So it would be the subject, I assume, in our next
Yeah,
planning board meeting.
discussion, decision.
Well, that was very interesting.
Yeah. Never boring.
Yeah. Thank you. Learn new stuff every day.
Okay.
The next is, all the next items for tonight are planning board discussions. We talk about a lot of different things. The first thing is a discussion with Rod Palmer, our building commissioner, regarding his comments on our zoning bylaw.
Good evening,
You actually
Chairman.
have to come up to the mic, of
Okay.
course, because they hear you at home there.
All right, that's fine.
We're televised and recorded.
Very good. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. So my reason for wanting to be here this evening is not earth-shattering. I just had a few ideas I thought maybe we could discuss, and sort of a house cleaning, I guess, for a couple of things, and just some suggestions that I might have for the board to make things somewhat easier for the building department. And I'll tell you what those few things are that I wanted to discuss this evening. Is we have, currently we have it's really not a bylaw, it's more of a requirement for accessory structures. And that would be, we have a requirement for accessory structures, typically sheds that are 100 square feet or less, that they be 3 feet from the property line. If they're greater than 100, so 100 to 200, they must be 10 feet from the property line, and it does not require a building permit. Neither does the one that's 100 square feet or less. Anything greater than 200 square feet requires a building permit. You need to comply with the applicable setbacks that are in our bylaw. And you have to be, the owner has to be cognizant of structure coverage and lot coverage. So we have this unwritten, as far as I can tell, I can't find anything written that states structures 100 square feet or less can be up to 3 feet from the property line. So I thought it might be something worthwhile discussing in creating something in our bylaw. We have nothing. So we have a brochure that's, I think, been around for decades that tells everybody their shed could be 3 feet from the property line, but we have nothing in our zoning bylaws. So just thought I would mention it. Maybe it's something that we could entertain and include in our bylaws at some point for something that we've been enforcing but have nothing written down. So that was one thing. The next subject I thought we could touch on was we have in our bylaws now structures that are built in, or I should say substantial alterations for single-family homes, or any structure for that matter built in a flood hazard area. When applying for a building permit and receiving a building permit, from the day that they commence work on that building permit, they need to wait 1 full calendar year before they can apply for another building permit. I don't know the reason for this. I think this is unique here in Falmouth with other cities and towns that have a lot of properties along the coast. So I really can't speak to why it was created, but it seems to put builders and homeowners at a disadvantage in that they have to wait 1 full year. So there's a 50% threshold that property owners cannot exceed when doing work on their home. If it exceeds 50% of the assessed value of the structure, then it's recognized as a substantial improvement. When the applicant does work on their property and it's less than 50%, and it is not a substantial alteration, here in Falmouth, once that job is completed, here in Falmouth, you have to wait 1 full year. Other cities and towns, it's not required, and I'm not quite sure why that is. And again, I think it puts builders and homeowners at a disadvantage, so I thought it might be worth discussing removing that section in our bylaw. The other thing that I wanted to mention was in our site plan review, site plan approval process, that seems to work well. The one disadvantage that the building department has is upon final inspections of these projects, these commercial buildings that have gone through site plan review, it's challenging for a building official to go out and do a final inspection. And what we have, all we have really is an approved site plan to look at as we do our inspection of the property and the building. And it's challenging because we're not land surveyors, we're not professional engineers, so it's difficult for us to look at a site plan, walk a site, and make a clear determination that they're in substantial compliance. So I didn't know if, I thought perhaps we might be able to discuss the idea of requiring a final as-built by the applicant, by their engineer, that would clearly show us in the building department that it is in substantial compliance. It's never perfect, it's never exact, but it would be helpful for us to have a document that was created by an engineer to give us some comfort level that it's in substantial compliance with the approved site plan. Right now, we have nothing. So it's challenging for us.
And you have as-built for the building.
We have as-built, but it's a foundation as-built.
Yeah.
So prior to a foundation inspection, what we do is we ask for a foundation as-built, as we do any type of a structure. But the site plan is much more inclusive, landscaping and drainage and stormwater drainage. And so all these things are challenging for us to go out and make sure that a catch basin is where it should be, and the rim elevation of that catch basin is where it should be. And so there's a lot of things that we just aren't, we can't verify.
Are you saying this would apply just to commercial properties?
Well, anything that requires site plan review. You know, it's a suggestion. Certainly, you know, it's an additional expense for the applicant, I understand that, but it's really the only way for the building department to be sure that it was built in compliance.
I think we call for compliance, but we never go out and inspect. We require these guys to do it, right?
Yes, if I may, this is I had a visit with our engineering department last week. We talked about a number of things, and this serendipitously came up. We make requirements for site plans, but most towns really don't have a sort of a method to make sure that that is complied. And I think Rod's suggestion in working with our engineering department, I think our engineering department, you know, has those people in-house who could identify those sort of things. We've talked about inspections and things like that for subdivisions as well with the engineering department, as well as inspections for site plan review. So what the mechanism is, I don't think we're, you know, fully set on that, but I think if we take the time to make sure, particularly that the stormwater works on the site and stormwater is not leaving the site, that it's important to make sure that they built what they said they were going to build and it comports with the drainage calculations, so we're not spilling water off someplace else. Just as one example, you know, but to make sure that things are where they're supposed to be on the plan. So I think it's a great idea and something that is typically, it's sort of absent in most bylaws that I've seen. These are the things you have to come in the door, and these are the things we approve, but who is at the back end of that? And I've been to sites to say, well, there's the catch basin, but to Rod's point, is it at that particular elevation it's supposed to be at? There are oftentimes change orders or changes to the site based on conditions. So that substantial completion, I think, is the operative term there for something like this.
Charlotte, you have a question?
I do. I wondered, what kind of cost are you talking about, and this would add for the
Well,
owners?
typically, an as-built is, a final as-built is created.
Yeah.
Typically by the site engineer that did the site plan. And they would go out and verify the location of all of those improvements, from landscape features to parking lots and number of parking spaces and curbs where they should be, and all of the things that would typically be seen on the site plan would be shown on the as-built.
Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of detail. If we were to apply it now to the walk-in clinic that's being built on the corner of Dillingham and Davis Strait, say, what do you think such an as-built plan would
Well,
cost?
it should be reflective of your site plan.
Well, it should.
Yeah,
It
but
should,
nothing's
but you'd have to go
perfect, and
back
it's not a perfect science.
and remeasure everything, to do it carefully. It would be on-site work, that's the point, the on-site work, and I just wonder at the expense of it.
You know,
I think it's a great
I wish
idea,
I
I just
could
wonder how much.
answer your question. I really don't know. I couldn't even begin to guess what the cost of that would be. The engineer would have already the location of the foundation at that point. So I think it would be more of a survey of the site that he has designed or she has designed to confirm that those plantings are where they should be, and the entrance to the building is at the width it should be, and the parking spaces are where they're supposed to be, and all of those features. And it could be as simple as an as-built after the foundation as-built to include all of those features with a blanket statement that states it is in substantial compliance and signed by the engineer. That's just a suggestion. There's
So
many
it would
other
be
ways.
replacing, because now your department is doing that.
We are,
so-
and some of these projects are built in the middle of the winter, and there's no landscaping. There may not be any landscaping placed, and they might do the work in the springtime. So there's really no mechanism for us to ensure full compliance. So just a suggestion.
John?
So, in a case like that where they couldn't do the landscaping, would that hold up their occupancy permit?
No, it wouldn't. You know, I would issue the certificate of occupancy. You know, this is New England, and that's what happens. You know, if they are ready for occupancy at the end of November, we would typically give them till the end of May to complete their landscaping.
And have you run into problems?
Well,
Where-
it's hard for me to know, John, because I cannot do an accurate field survey because I'm not an engineer. So for me to go out there and measure where things should be based on a site plan, it's impossible for me to do so. So, you know, I do become somewhat familiar with the site plan before I go out. I look around, but it's difficult for me to be positive about where everything should be.
Okay, thank you.
I think we've seen examples where things weren't done correctly from what the plans stated, and when it comes to releasing bonds or covenants, we've found that out. I can think of one or two off the top of my head where that's happened.
But it seems to be a transfer of what's now a public expense to the owners, to a private expense. So I just wonder at the magnitude when one of
It is.
the...
I guarantee I don't know what the cost is, but it could be thousands of dollars.
It could easily be. It's certainly a boon to the engineers, and it seems to me in the local comprehensive plan, we were discussing streamlining a process, and I wonder how that impacts that goal.
Well, I think streamlining is one thing, but shortcuts are something else. You want to make sure people have complied with what the requirements are. And I think to the point is the catch basin where the catch basin is supposed to be, is the curb cut where the curb cut is supposed to be, is important, because sometimes it's very difficult to get a site to work based on the drainage, and that is, that is a lot of work for the most part for the reviewing, for the designing engineer, and for our reviewing engineers. So our reviewing engineers, the town's engineers, are looking at these things and their comments and their references. So I think the point is it's a good idea to make sure that it's put in complying substantially with what we're looking at. So we can look at and have some conversations with the development community about the cost and things like
Yeah,
that.
I think we should. I think we should look for some feedback, keep this discussion open, and talk about it more. I think your point's well taken. I'd want to know how serious that cost is.
Yeah, we don't require a bond for site plans, and I don't know anybody who does. We require one for subdivisions typically.
Subdivision.
A bond is a big out-of-pocket for a
Yeah.
developer. Typically, they're a tri-party agreement or a bond, or we take cash for subdivisions as well, without 2 IDs, by the way. There's not a bond for a site plan, but I think this compliance issue is important, particularly as we look at building things out and as we look at larger projects. When you look at a potential Davis Straits redevelopment project, we want to make sure that that's put together the way it is, because it's a lot of moving parts. So I think to Rod's
I'd like
point.
to move back to the previous conversation that you had, in particular about the 1-year waiting period. And I just want to understand, because I watched many houses get built halfway and the next year get built, and I watched my neighbors and everything fight through this. What about the compliance with, would that get people around the issue of no more habitable space in the floodplain if their renovations were less than 50%? I mean, sometimes people are adding a small room in the back of the house, and now they're in the flood, they want to put a master bedroom on their house. They got plenty of lot to do it. And I've had clients that come to this, and under this old bylaw, I said you couldn't do it. They wanted to put a master bedroom in, but now that's because the floodplain changed, that's going to be a foot higher. So to get into the bedroom, they have to have a step to go up.
Well, if
Would
the
this
bed,
get them around that issue?
if the cost of that lateral addition, that bedroom, is less than 50%, it doesn't need to comply.
What I'm saying
does-
is,
so it does
this
not need
might
to
be,
be-
this might be a workaround. If they only did the lateral addition in less than
Well,
50%, and then came back the next year and did some more?
Well, I think maybe a good example for easy understanding is if you had a straight ranch and you wanted to put an addition on each end. You put an addition on the left side, it's less than 50% of the assessed value of the structure, so it is not a substantial alteration. So you're issued a building permit for that. And let's say you work fast and you're all done in a month. Before you can apply for the addition on the other end of your house, you have to wait a full year. And I don't know the reason for that. It doesn't seem to make sense. We're just stalling. We're just stalling for what people are wanting to do, and I don't quite understand the reason for it. So I think it's a hardship for homeowners and developers. I don't understand the reason for it. This delay, in my opinion, just doesn't make sense. Now, for that homeowner that built that addition on the left side, they now wait a year and they can build another addition on the other end, provided that that addition is not triggering substantial compliance, which again is 50%.
Because they have it reassessed, so the addition now counts in the assessment. It gives the
Yep,
kid
that plays a little
just
role.
enough.
Yep, that might increase it enough so that.
So this would give some flexibility to the people that are really pinned down in the floodplain and putting little additions on their house.
It would.
Okay.
And it works, it doesn't seem to be a problem in other communities, so I don't know that it would be a problem here. I just think it puts people at a disadvantage. that are
Mind if
trying
we
to
open up
achieve-
to the public for a comment on this? We have
Yeah, I think it's a
someone
wonderful
that's very
idea.
anxious. But if you come up, I'm going to ask you a question about the site plan work and how much that's going to cost.
Yeah.
Step up here.
My name is Michael McGrath. I'm a registered engineer and land surveyor. If you go back in history to where we first adopted floodplain, there were a couple of instances where people churned their way through permits, and we were actually threatened with suspension because sometimes they didn't get a certificate of occupancy. So they actually had 2 or 3 building permits in a row, and then it was over the 50%. So if you go back in time, there was a very good reason for the delay because there was what I'm going to call churning of building permits in a floodplain. If you don't want to make it a year, make it shorter, 90 days, but you have to get a certificate of compliance. I was on the Building Code Board of Appeals, or I still am, and a long time ago a man came in and he had never got an occupancy permit for like 2 or 3 building permits. And then we were confronted, he wanted a variance of the floodplain standards, and you can't give variances of floodplain standards. So there was a very good reason for it, but it's probably 40 years old now when that happened. So-
If they were required to get a certificate of occupancy, would that solve the problem?
Well, yeah, but there still should be a little bit of a delay, to my mind. Otherwise, you're going to see these, what I'm going to describe
You
as
talking about
church.
open permits that they have?
Well, believe me, they've got to close out all the permits before they apply for it. So you don't want it to look like, oh, I need $100,000, I can only get 60, so I'm going to go in for 60, then wait like a month and then go back in and get the other 40. So there was a reason that the bylaw was written the way it was. And there was a problem with the program way back in the beginning, probably in the late 70s. So as far as your question about site plans, any significant business development is going to require an Alta survey as part of the financing. For instance, I've done several major projects, and I've ended up doing as-builts for the mortgage, for whoever's granting the mortgage, in order to get Alta coverage. Alta is title insurance.
Okay,
And
say that
so-
again, what kind of coverage?
Title insurance.
Okay, use the term though before, I'm not familiar.
Alta, A-L-T-A.
Alter.
Yeah, I should know what it stands for, but I don't.
Okay, so that's
It's an acronym.
an acronym. I was trying to figure out what you're talking about, an
Yeah,
acronym, okay.
but the bottom line is, for instance, the CVS, I did probably 3 Alta surveys there, because every time there's a new mortgage, they get an Alta survey. I've done a TRIA 2 or 3 times. So if there's a major project that's going to have a significant financing, don't worry, the bank is going to require an as-built. And please do not use the word "I certify construction is in accordance with the plan," because that's transferring the responsibility from the contractor to the poor guy that prepares the plan. And I will not certify conformance with construction standards because I'm not paid to do that. I'm paid to locate things.
So you'll certify that this is where they are?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Well, thank you. I think it's more clear. Okay, we have more to discuss with you. I hope you didn't mind that a little in a little.
If I could address.
John's got a quick question. Go ahead.
Just a question for you, Rod. Could you enlighten us what the difference is between alteration less than 50% of value and what the applicant would have to do if it was more than 50% of the value?
Sure. So if your home falls, for example, if we're talking about a home, if your home falls within the flood hazard area, whether it be an A zone or a velocity zone, and this alteration is greater than 50% of the assessed value of the structure. So you have a home that's worth $200,000. For easy math, the land is worth $100,000, the house is worth $100,000. If the estimated value of work is greater than $50,000, then your home must be brought into full compliance with the building code and FEMA regulations, which typically means you need to elevate the home if it's in an A zone. So most people will limit their amount of work so that they don't exceed the 50% threshold. Now, if I could just speak to Mike's comment, Mike had mentioned that there's sort of a churning of building permits. Well, with a building permit application, there's an application that the homeowner or the builder has to fill out. And this is an application that is inclusive of all of the work, materials and labor, from plumbing to electrical to building. And that document at the end shows me exactly how much money they're putting into the project. We keep that on file. Now, they would not be able to obtain another building permit while that one is open. That one has to be closed. If they applied for another building permit for work in the house, it would be applicable to the first permit. The value of that second permit would be applicable to the first. That dollar amount would combine, and that could trigger substantial compliance. So when issuing building permits to folks, I explain thoroughly so they completely understand the dynamics of FEMA and how it works. So before we would issue that second permit, the first permit would have to be closed. The difference is, if that piece of the bylaw were removed, when the first building permit was closed, the work was complete and done, they could apply for a building permit to build the addition on the other end of the house. The way it is now, they have to wait 1 year from the day the work commences, which I typically would expect to be the day that they are granted the building permit.
So you would suggest that as soon as the permit's closed, they would be allowed to
Right.
pull a second permit?
Well, they have to wait a year.
As opposed to waiting a year?
Well, they have to wait a year. So
Right.
if they pull a building permit on January 1st and the project is done on May 1st, they have to wait until the next January 1st
Yeah.
before they can apply for another building permit.
Okay.
And I understand your reasoning for 40 years ago, but I just don't know that it makes sense.
Isn't it that it's the assessed value, right? You don't determine the assessed value, the assessor.
I do not, no. So
So when they do the addition, the assessors have to come out and reassess the house.
the assessors would, they can use the assessor's tax records for the assessed value of the structure, or they can hire a licensed appraisal company.
Get 3 of them, yeah.
One, just one,
One?
just one. Yeah, we try to keep the expense to a minimum so they can have one.
Jim?
Yeah.
Mr. Parma, would you mind giving us a sense of the frequency of this problem?
Well, it's hard for me to say how often it happens, but I've had dozens of conversations with people that are frustrated by it, that they have to wait 6 months or 7 months to complete the work that they want to do on their home. So maybe somebody, for example, buys a home and it was 40 or 50 years old and they want to do some exterior work. They want to put new windows in, a new roof and new siding and give the outside a complete facelift. And that brings them to the threshold.
Does that count? I thought siding and roofing did not count in the threshold.
Well, maintenance does not, but if you are to renovate the exterior of your home, complete renovation, it is considered
So
substantial.
siding and roofing does count.
Yes, if you completely strip your home inside and out, and you go beyond the 50%, it triggers FEMA compliance.
Let me ask it another way. What if you just wanted to re-side your house? Shingles are old. They're
If
40
you-
years old, just don't want to change anything, not change the windows, just put shingles.
Would not be counted, would not be.
How about the roof? No changes, just putting on a roof, not new sheeting, just
Wouldn't.
old roof on, new roof on.
Would be maintenance. So roofing, siding, things like that.
What about
that are
windows?
done that are done for that purpose, just a roof. So if you were to come to the building department and say we're gonna raise the roof, or we're going to put,
I understand.
Yeah.
So, okay, but some of these houses, this siding and roofing could push you over that threshold really, really quickly. You could be
Yeah.
doing a little teeny addition and a cedar roof and all the new siding on a big house, you're.
Well, what I was going to say, Mr. Fox, is that some folks do extensive exterior work, and then they might, on phase 2, do extensive interior work. And sometimes the expense of both is high, but they're limited to doing one this year and then doing the interior next year. So in an effort to not delay their projects, I thought it would be worth mentioning to the board.
Would you be waiting for the assessors to come back and determine the value, because that 50% calculation is done off assessed value, or are you just going to add the value of your work to the project?
I wouldn't add the value. The value of the work would not increase the value of the home by that amount. So they can, if they apply for a second permit, they can either use the same assessed value,
or get the assessors to come
or
back.
pay another few $100s and have a new appraisal done.
I understand.
Putting a new kitchen in my little house would push me over the limit.
Paul?
Yeah, 2 questions. We had some discussion some time ago about determining the square footage of the property. You're basing that on the square footage. What's your thought on that?
Square footage,
of the home. There was some discussion we had a couple of weeks ago where there was confusion as to how would they determine the square footage. Remember that discussion?
Right,
Well,
inside
that was
measurements
according
are
to the
outside.
accessory apartment bylaw, and
Well-
we're talking about whether we want to use the assessor's records or an architect's records. We haven't quite
What do you
resolved that
use?
yet.
what do I use for, I don't think I understand.
He uses the plan that's in front of him.
Yeah.
When a plan's submitted, it has the square footage right on it. He's got to use that.
Yeah, he's not determining how.
Whether or not it matches up with the problem is our assessors have a ratio on some of the roof lines, it's 50% of the floor area, some on the second floor, you know what I mean?
Okay, for
the area
story.
can be 50%, 75%, 80 or 90, depending on the shape of the roof. And that drives people crazy because they take out their tape measure and they go, where's this? No one understands that, but they have to go see the assessors and understand those codes. They're really complicated.
They are.
That's what causes all the confusion, is because no one knows them but the assessors. And
But
a few
with-
people
with-
that bother to look them up.
But with respect to FEMA and what is a substantial alteration and what is not, it's really the value.
Right.
It's really the value. It's really not, the square footage is really not
Doesn't,
applicable.
doesn't matter.
So,
So their choice is to wait until the assessors come out and do it again, hire a private appraisal, or work off the old assessment.
correct.
Okay, so that's,
The other question is, as you well know, we're going through a review of the bylaw now, so this is very timely and whatnot, and perhaps we can just get an update of the status of that from the town planner.
Well, that would be a committee report.
yeah,
Yeah,
That's
that's
coming
later.
up.
that's coming up.
Yeah,
Yeah, we got some
yeah.
more stuff to discuss. On Rod's comments, don't go anywhere, Rod, we have more to talk with you about, but I'm
Okay.
just wondering on the board members, does anyone else have discussions on what
question.
we've discussed so
I'm
far?
not clear on what the consequence is. If you go from being a not substantial addition or it's a substantial addition, what are the consequences of that change when you go over the 50%?
That's a great question, and the answer is that you need to bring your home into compliance, so.
Whole
if-
home.
So if you're already Title V compliant, you're already in compliance, it's not an issue, but in certain areas it would be.
Well, you would have to bring the entire house up. It could be the electrical system, it could be insulation.
So
it-
typically, what's necessary is the house has to be elevated, sometimes 12 inches, sometimes 5 feet. The basement has to be filled in so it becomes a crawl space, so the floor of that crawl space is even with the exterior grade. It includes installing flood vents in that crawl space. All of the mechanicals in the crawl space need to be taken out and brought up inside the home so that you have, at the end of the day, a crawl space with nothing down there. And all of your mechanicals are up, and the elevation of your finished floor is 12 inches above whatever that, if it's an A-zone, whatever that elevation is of that A-zone. So if you're in an elevation AE 13, your finished floor would be at 14 elevation, and all of your mechanicals would be brought up and your basement would be filled in. So it's a substantial amount of work and expense.
Yeah.
So people try to avoid it.
Yeah, thank you.
What most people are doing is, there's also a flood insurance component. If you do all these things that Rod just mentioned, your house complies with the flood insurance building code and your insurance is lower. But most of the people that are down there just stopped getting flood insurance, and they take the money out of another house and they go in all cash because they can't deal with how
Right, all
complicated the
that.
rules have become. It's really tough to deal with.
So
It
So
is.
we're going to have some more feedback on this to make a decision, but we'll be working on it.
Okay, now, with the shed, you're looking for a place to insert something about the shed requirements?
I am. I mean, keep in mind that the building department for decades has been informing folks that they can build a shed 100 square feet or less
Yeah.
and place it 3 feet to the property line, sides or rear, not front. So there probably are hundreds, if not thousands.
There are.
So, and I have nothing in writing.
Yeah.
So I thought it,
But were you also saying they're going to count, will they now count in lot coverage ratio, or they would just?
Well, yes.
Yeah.
yes,
So, because right now they don't.
well, they do.
Yeah, they
So
No, if you have to go get less than 100-foot shed, you don't have to get a building permit, they don't do the calculations, you just put the shed on.
well, what I tell folks is that a building permit's not required for anything under 200 square feet, but you still need to be cognizant of your lot coverage with structures and
But
impervious.
who checks?
Well,
Well, not me, but they still need to be cognizant.
You're saying so that it's just, well, how can you enforce it if no one looks at it?
Well, it's the responsibility of the property owner not to exceed 20% of structure cover and 40%.
Well, I've misspoken in the past because I told them they couldn't do it, it's because no one checks.
would you recommend any changes to the setbacks or anything?
No, I think, there's not been any problems
Yeah.
with it. I think it's reasonable.
Yeah.
A 10 by 10 shed is very small.
Yeah.
And for it to be 3 feet from the property line, I don't think it's unreasonable.
Yeah.
I think it's logical, I think it's practical for a small shed like that. I just think it might be wise of us to have something in our bylaw that states that.
'Cause
Right now, we have
think
nothing.
In section 240, 40, 42, there's this mention of accessory structures, and so that might be the place. I can't think exactly which
Yeah.
section it is, but that might be a section to insert something about sheds.
Rod, if Mike would like to get up and comment, since we have him here, if you don't mind, we'll go back and forth.
Your zoning bylaw defines yards in a particular way, and it allows permissible projections as defined in the building code. Well, the building code's been changed, and they have deleted permissible projections. So I suggest that you define permissible projections, which were defined under the old building code as eaves less than 2 feet, corner boards, fascia boards, things like that, so that you can actually have a situation where under the old zoning bylaw, house complied, and now someone could say, well, the E is no longer a permissible projection. So you should straighten that out and add permissible projections to your bylaw.
Add it back in.
Add it right in the bylaw instead of referencing a different code.
What about cantilevering a floor over a foundation a foot?
Well, then define it as what a permissible projection is. That was not permissible before. Was eaves less than 2 feet.
When did they change that law?
The building code changed, I don't know, about 5 years ago.
Okay, because I was wondering,
And I've
the house
said-
I live in has a foot hanging over the foundation. It got squeezed in, but it was 10 years ago.
Well, I don't remember.
No, I'm just trying to
But
understand.
permissible projections are no longer defined in the code. You should define them in the bylaw.
You got that?
Writing things down, yes, sir.
Okay, you had anything more? But because we have things we want to talk to you about if you're.
No, those were the 3 things. I just wanted to talk about the 3-foot setback and possibility of including something in our site plan approval and the floodplain.
Okay, I have a pretty serious issue with the determination that, for example, at Kenyon's Corner, when there's a 6-foot column that goes 5 feet down into the ground and has, 30 foot of steel on it, that's not counted as a structure. It's not counted in lot coverage ratio. It can be put in the front yard. And it changes. We used to have a site plan. Here's this as a catch. It used to be something called a major review, and people were concerned that the planning boards were coming in, and every time they were doing something, little changes, they would call it major review, and they have to do the whole site plan over. So they passed a bylaw, I don't know if it's state or not, but they put a cap on it of 5 parking spaces, and they used the term, or 1,000 square feet of living space. So these big solar arrays have no living space. They got tons of steel and hundreds of tons of product, and they're not counted as structure. They could go anywhere we want. So I think that's that's your determination because the code's written that way, correct?
I think it should be clear. I think it should be clearly defined. I
Yeah.
think what triggers site plan approval now is, I think it's 1,000 square feet of gross floor area.
But it says living space, though,
Yeah.
because you determined that or floor area, same thing. These things don't have floor area. They have roofs,
Right.
they got structure, they got steel, but they don't have floor area.
Yeah, they should be more in line with the wind turbine bylaw that we have. I mean, that's pretty strict as far as where you can place them and how close to
Well,
property lines and.
Well, the thing is, what I want to do is, I'm just wanting to have this one conversation, but
Okay.
later on, we got, we didn't talk about, did we talk about the moratorium?
Not yet.
No, that's,
That is even on here?
yeah,
Yeah.
second
Second.
right under.
Oh, yeah.
I
Once
put the moratorium and ROD right next to each other,
Right.
anticipating.
Because once we put them, what I've, having almost a heart attack when I saw what was happening at Kenyon's, because I've lived in that neighborhood for 50 or 60 years, I quickly looked into the Barnstable, town of Barnstable, and they have a full one-page guidelines or site plan for everything to do with solar. And it's pretty straightforward. It talks about engineering, layout, where it's in the yard, the whole thing. And so that these things just can't pop up.
Yeah.
So I think that's our response, Rod. I wonder what you think about it.
Well, I think, I think that, as businesses evolve and businesses, in an effort to reduce their consumption of energy, choose to have these solar arrays, whether they be ground-mounted or mounted on a roof, and how can one blame somebody for wanting to reduce their energy costs? So I think that if we're going to require that they visit the planning board for site plan review, I think that we need to modify our bylaw so that it's clearly defined that these types of solar arrays be inclusive of
But
site
if
plan
we
review.
didn't do this, well, you could start in East Falmouth and have these arrays in every parking lot all the way up to Woods Hole, and we'd become Solar City. Stop and Shop would be nothing about it. The mall, they could be everywhere if we don't stop this. I mean, great, they
I
need the
suppose
energy.
they could, yeah.
But if we're concerned as a board of design review and site plan review, and these things don't even fall into our thing, we might as well just forget about it, because at that point, you can't even see the buildings that are on the site. It becomes, the solar field is larger than the buildings themselves in some cases. Now, it's great, they save energy, but is that really what we want for our town?
I don't know, that would really be up to the planning board.
Well, I know.
But,
Sorry.
So I think that, I guess beauty is in the eye of the beholder, because I look at these solar arrays and, I look at them and I look and see an engineering marvel.
It is.
So for me, they're not detrimental, so I guess it's all point of view.
Well, yes, John?
So if, taking Kenyon's as an example, if they wanted to take those solar panels and put it on the roof of their building,
Mhm.
would they need to get a building permit for that?
Yes.
Okay? And would they not be denied for any reason?
Typically, solar panels that are placed on roofs require engineering so that we know that, and they're typically very light, so very rarely are they denied a building permit. But more than likely, no, they would not if the structure can accommodate those solar panels, then a building permit would more than likely be issued.
And every gas station in town has overhead panels to protect the vehicles, and has fire suppression systems in there. So they could put solar panels on top of that if they wanted to, theoretically.
I would imagine.
And about 60% of all new energy created in this country right now is either wind or solar. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, I believe that.
Well, I just think we went after design review, and we're trying to build better looking, design review and do it part of the site plan. And if we say these things don't count,
Yeah, I mean, nobody's trying to stop solar. It's
No,
just
no.
We want it in the right place.
I've probably done more solar in this town than anybody.
Yeah,
And I think it's a great thing in the right place.
yeah.
Have any more questions?
No, I agree with you. What is it that Barnstable is proposing that's so attractive?
No, they already have it. They
Yeah.
already have a bylaw, and if you want to put ground-mounted solar array, they have a whole list. You have to do engineering, you have to show the setbacks, you have to show the lot coverage ratio. It goes to the planning board, and they say, yeah, that's what it's going to look like. Right now, we go through this whole thing, and we're real careful about how the windows on the building, the design, the color, and everything. and then they could come in and put solar panels in the front yard and cover it all up.
I get the point. I wonder what Barnstable would have said about Kenyon's installation there. What setbacks are they
would have had to come
proposing?
design, they would have to both design review and site plan review.
What setbacks does Barnstable require? Do they say you have to put it on top of the building, behind the building, beside? What has Barnstable done that would prevent your parking lot coverage scenario?
Because it goes to the planning board for design review, and the planning board, and lot coverage, so the planning board can say yes or no. Somebody makes a decision that it works. Okay? I didn't read the whole thing and say this is exactly what you should do, I'm just putting it up as an
Oh,
example. I didn't memorize it. We have no requirements, they have a whole page, that's what I'm trying to bring up.
I understand that point. I just thought that this had gone further. So you think now what we should have is a moratorium until we get together our page?
Either we bring the page, well, kind of like we did with the wind turbines. You weren't here, but when we were facing that problem, Brian gave us a scenario. He says, first, you don't go and write the bylaw right away. The first thing you do is put a moratorium. Then you have hearings on the bylaw. You bring all the interested parties in, and you listen to what everyone says, and then you figure it out, and then you bring it to town meeting and see if you get it passed by town meeting. But it's something that's done with a lot of thought process,
right.
instead of just saying, okay, put it up.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm getting at. I think I don't know I know we need the moratorium and a new bylaw. I'm not gonna tell you what should be in the bylaw, I'm just saying there are other towns have them.
Sadly, we've gotten busy with other things, because this has been something we have talked about, having a solar bylaw,
Yeah.
and it's just been pushed back and pushed back and
Well,
pushed
changes
back.
in technology aren't when we did, these things didn't exist, so
Yeah.
we're really just adapting to the changes in technology, John.
So when you talk about a moratorium, I look in our book and it says that the moratorium was put in place in 2012. Has there been discussion since then and a bylaw written?
Yeah,
Okay,
as fast as we could.
okay.
When the
I think
moratorium
we
went
only
in,
had, we had.
it was only for about a year.
No, we extended it a year.
It only could be for 1 year,
Yeah.
and it has to be extended for a year if you're not done.
And the written bylaw was accepted by town meeting?
Yep, and then it's all done.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's just so you don't have to do the bylaw quickly. So you have to have hearings, everyone gets to talk about it, all stakeholders be involved, the energy committee, we work it out.
Okay.
We spent months on that.
Jim, you're focusing solar panels on commercial properties and the solar trees, I'll call them
Right.
that. Okay. But there is a community, I've heard it, I can't remember, Beverly or whatever, where a homeowner built a huge solar panel in their front yard because that was where the sun was appropriate for a solar panel. And I believe the court decided, yeah, that's fine.
Well, we don't do
So-
residential, we only do commercial. Site plan, I'm saying this is part of site plan review.
I'm saying if we're going to create a bylaw that has us look at solar panels as perhaps nuisances
Yeah.
or unattractive, you should not
See,
just
this-
rule out homes.
This falls into why we want buildings on the street, because in the back, I mean,
Doesn't
you
matter.
could have a bunch of them behind Main Street, who wouldn't care?
Who cares?
Um,
But if you had it right there against Main
Yeah.
Street or right there in a residential neighborhood,
Right.
and it's the size of the house and it's
Yeah.
blocking the house.
So when we're looking at East Main and Davis Straits, this is something that we need to have in place. So that,
So if we're bringing the topic up, I'm suggesting that we need to broaden the aspect of what we're looking at a bit.
So if I may just, so I have on my notes, look at Barnstable's requirements for solar, consider amendments to site plan review. And this is something we had talked about during the interview process when I was here about improvements, changes to our site plan review. Some of those things being definition of structures, this whole issue of 1,000 square foot of ground floor coverage. I think that if I'm on the right page here, we're looking at incorporating solar as a structure under the definitions, a canopy like this, as well as some provision in our site plans to cite them.
yeah.
But I will point out, as we've talked about before, that Massachusetts General Law does have solar as special in Massachusetts. And the provision in the law predates large-scale solar voltaic. So there are people who will contend that, oh, you can put these anywhere. But I think the issue is you cannot prohibit or unreasonably regulate the installation of solar energy systems in buildings of structures to facilitate the collection, except where necessary to protect public health, safety, or welfare. So we've got to sort of walk that line to make sure that what we're looking at doing comports with Massachusetts general law, even though when this was written, it didn't envision large-scale solar voltaic. It assumed that, you know, the hippie down the street was going to put solar panels on their roof because, dude, that was cool. I paraphrase.
Well,
but it's now gotten to the point where this is being used much more broadly. So I think you're correct to the point that we should be on this and incorporating it into our
And
stuff.
counting them as a structure where you can't put a garage in your front yard because it's a structure, so.
Would that language preclude a moratorium?
No, I think if town meeting wants to vote a moratorium is not a prohibition, it's a timeout. We're going to take a year or whatever that time is to study the issue and to come up with regulations that make sense. Usually the moratorium is based on a perception of something bad might happen. Once again, paraphrasing. But, you know, let's take an opportunity to look at that. And we've done moratoriums, and most towns have done moratoriums for marijuana when they're recreational or medical marijuana or things like that. So it's something new that's coming down the pike that you want to make sure that you're out in front of, so you're not, you know, you wind up with something.
Ground-mounted solar arrays as an accessory structure in a residential neighborhood are allowed. But they're not allowed as a primary structure, or if you're generating power and selling it back to the grid, that's a different story, right? I mean, you could put ground-mounted solar array in your backyard right now if you're using the power in the house. That's an acceptable use. We had to create the light industrial C because we did not have ground-mounted solar arrays in our district at all. So we had to create that because that's where we put them. But with this interpretation, we really didn't need to do that. They could go anywhere. So it's like, kind of like.
Yeah.
So whether it's a moratorium or not, I certainly think we need to sharpen our pencil and take a look at those things. And I think
Absolutely.
Barnstable is a good place to start.
Well, Barnstable passed the state muster, right? They didn't get theirs rejected. You can't, basically you're saying that the state says you can't make them illegal if the state says they're okay. We're not trying to supersede state law. Barnstable didn't seem to have a problem with their bylaw.
So, and while you mentioned it to me before, I haven't had a chance to track theirs down, but I will.
Well, there's probably not enough experience yet to find out what the state's idea of unreasonable is. Because you can have reasonable regulation, it said. There just
Yeah.
wouldn't be enough rules yet to have said what's unreasonable.
But we got to balance, we talk so much about design, we talk so much about landscape. These things, they put them over, nothing's going to grow underneath these things. We had landscaping on these sites, that just goes away. I mean, it's covered, it's there, but it's going to die.
Yeah.
John?
Just a final question. When they did this solar at Kenyon's, did they have to pull a building permit for that?
They did.
And what type of inspections were done?
I don't have the file in front of me, Mr. Drewley, so it's hard for me to tell you exactly what inspections and
Was
when.
there like
But
electrical
typically,
inspection?
yeah,
or-
so typically on something like that, there would be engineering involved.
I mean,
They
those
would-
massive pieces of concrete, you had to look at the whole.
So there would have been engineering, design engineering on the footings, the stanchions that hold these up. And that project, if I remember correctly, was done under, it was a controlled construction project where the engineer that designed them was on site quite often to ensure that these stanchions were placed and built according to his design. So we did do inspections of the footings, and the electrical inspector, I'm sure, did his electrical inspections as well.
Thank you.
If I may, could I just address one thing that Mike McGrath had mentioned? He talked about the idea of introducing something that mentioned the projection of certain things. In our zoning bylaws under 240-13 under building area, if I could just read one sentence from that, it says, "The aggregate of the maximum horizontal cross-section area of the building on a lot excluding cornices, eaves, gutters, or chimneys projecting not more than 24 inches." So we have something now.
Okay.
Just so you know.
It's in the definition of yacht.
Yes.
Yeah.
So will we revisit that? Everybody else?
Thank you.
I'm good. This was good.
Okay,
All right.
more discussion on, thank you. Thank you. Unless you want to stay for the flow neutral bylaw policy, but you'll hear enough about that.
Yes.
Update flow neutral bylaw policy.
If I may.
Yes, Tom.
I believe in your packet you have the most recently adopted policy by the Board of Selectmen, guidelines for the flow neutral bylaw. So this, we have a bylaw for flow neutral that basically says you can't overbuild on a piece of property because you have sewer. You have to basically comport with what you could put on the site prior to, as part of the funding that we got to build the wastewater treatment plant. So the flow neutral bylaw has been in place, but there's not really a policy for how to determine a priority for who goes.
A question though,
Yes, sir.
is that only goes into effect when we get to the 80% level?
Well, when we get to the 80% level, we have to report to DEP what we're going to do to comply with building out the rest of the development. So as wastewater superintendent has been tracking folks who have got requested tie into the sewer plant, it's become quite apparent that the plant is filling up. And so we want to make sure that the priority or the guidelines for the selectmen, and in the bylaw it says the selectmen have absolute authority on the flow neutral bylaw.
But if the town were to solve the, what is it, the
Discharge.
the discharge thing, does that take the heat off this issue, or does this issue stay even if they solve that problem?
Well, the issue would probably, we'd have a bit more room in the plant, but we are going to fill up the plant before we get a discharge.
Because what I'm thinking about in B1 zoning downtown, we have some buildings that are for a 12,000 square foot in one building. And they're on a 5,000 square foot lot. There's no room to put a septic system in them at all. And they have 2 floors of vacancy that are unused. Are those buildings going to be doomed to have, 2/3 of the building never occupied because they can't connect to the sewer anymore? I mean, that's the kind of a question I ask. If downtown, like where, in B1, you can go right up to the lot line. So if there's no room for sewers. So there's some very large buildings on Main Street that the second and third floors are vacant for one reason. One of the reasons are we have a bylaw that says no more than 6 units per acre, and if these giant buildings are on a half acre, they can only put 3 units on it, and if they have 8,000 square feet of space to go into 3 units, it doesn't make economic sense. We're trying to put housing on top of our other buildings and infill all our larger buildings, and I'm concerned that this aspect will be in conflict with the local comprehensive plan that says we should be putting increased density in our village centers.
Well, to your point, one of the reasons we're having this discussion is to inform the selectmen's policy.
Right.
So those things that we think should be considered are exactly the reason we're having this discussion. So if we want to talk about those priority areas currently identified as economic development, affordable housing, mixed-use development in the business redevelopment zone and for municipal use, then you're saying that perhaps we should consider that mixed-use development in the B1 zoning district in addition to the business redevelopment?
Anything in a village center is what I'm Because when we talked about this, about where we wanted to grow, we wanted to limit the growth to the village centers, because that's where we could put sewer. And that's where public transportation was, and that's if we have to grow, we grow that area. But we also talked in the local comprehensive plan, when we were passing this bylaw, about we could change the zoning in summer areas, and for instance, we could take away some of the development. Remember this, Pat? You're the one that explained this to me. Take away, like, make it 5-acre zoning out in some areas, and that would satisfy the requirement, the flow neutral bylaw, because even though we're allowing a little bit of growth here, we're restricting in another area, and could we get credit for that? And that's what I thought we did.
That's what I thought.
We
too.
all thought
Yeah.
that when that happened, and I don't hear anyone talking about that.
Yeah.
I just hear them talk about no more building. And I'm just wondering, I would like, you agree with me, Pat, that's what we were told?
That's what we were talking about,
Yeah.
transfer of development rights
Yeah.
by,
Right.
So if we wanted to have greater density downtown, we could, as long as we kept the same amount, and we go further away from down, have less density, we'd get to neutral. And that was my understanding of it as well. So there was more than just one solution to this, about this problem. There was a couple different ways. And that seems to have gone away, and now it's just no more building.
one thing we have to realize is that we could do this with all good intentions, and 10 years further on, somebody comes in and says, yeah, we need to subdivide this land out there in Hatchville that may be 5-acre now, and we want to subdivide it and make smaller lots
Well,
because we need.
40B can come in and take it away from us in a second anyway.
But I'm just talking about what we decide now when we do transfer development rights, unless there is some kind of real toothiness to that decision.
Well, we've talked about changing the TDR bylaw,
For quite a while now, and it hasn't ever
Yeah.
happened,
Yeah.
yes.
so. yeah.
I guess if that's a possibility. So it's a complicated step. I can tell you it's causing nightmares for some of the people that are trying to build right now and dealing with it. If you were going through your building permit and you're all the way through, and they just woke up to this a couple of weeks ago, and you're getting hit with it again, it's pretty serious.
So I'm thinking if we're discussing this and going to put a suggestion towards the selectmen, a bullet point number 5 could simply be that the transfer of development rights could be used as a tool to further the flow neutral policy.
Because at the same time they were doing this bylaw, I remember them looking at the Spring Bars Road property and saying, we've got 140 units that could be here by right, because they used 8, whatever units per
I think it
acre.
was even more than that.
Well, they had a
Whatever
really
it
big
was,
number.
yes.
But they seemed to have forgot about that.
Yeah.
Because in order to solve the housing problem in this town, we've got to be able to put more housing, and the cheapest place to put more houses on top of another structure. And if that increased density is prohibited because we're on the sewer and we can't use it, then we're just throwing up another roadblock.
Yeah, and then we're into sprawl.
Then we're into sprawl. Multifamily district goes away. We can forget about the ideas that we've had on the Davis. I mean, if they're going to hold us to what could be done on Davis Straits,
They're already, I'm talking about the hotel down at the corner there near your office, saying they're approaching the point where they can't approve that.
Right.
So there's no room left for multifamily housing going up Davis Straits.
Yeah.
And yet, didn't they also say they're going to have to now expand the sewage system so that in
Yeah.
fact it's a much bigger system? And isn't that the next thing that would happen?
I think it
Yeah,
is.
there is another phase to it.
Right. So a transfer of development rights could be useful also, but the best thing is the expansion of the sewage system.
I think we would need both to
Probably.
make this the kind of community that we would
Right,
like to see.
and it would have to be a lien on the land of some enforceable type, so you couldn't take that 5 acres and divvy it all up.
Right.
So anyways, when I heard the selectmen talking about this, they said it should probably be a joint meeting in the future with the planning board. So we'll publish some of our ideas, and then we'll get together and work it out.
Yeah, so presently I have inclusion of B1 and B2 zoning as for mixed-use development.
Yes, mixed use, but isn't it in the village centers? I don't think we have B2 anyways but the village center anyway.
That's the thing. I mean, when you say in village centers, we really only have it in this downtown area pretty much. There are little pieces of it. I think you may have a little piece in North Falmouth and.
I think there is.
There is?
Just a tiny bit, yeah. I don't think there's any in West Falmouth.
I think you're right, there isn't.
Is there any going up
think there's one
28A toward Mashpee? Is there some along there?
I think there's some in LaPointe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
all
think
along
there's
Route
another bit.
28, but they're in the village centers.
Yeah, small, right.
Yeah,
But
one-
it wouldn't be bad to have mixed use in
I
those
think
places.
it's the mixed-use component that we need to be able to do. That's really,
Well, this is gonna help us,
Yeah.
right here.
Just we'll have a commercial for that later.
Oh, thank you.
On the list of things to
Right.
have commercials
We
about.
we should flash it off.
but you'll pass the comments, and then we'll have a joint meeting with them to discuss it. So this isn't our one shot at
No,
this.
no, so I'm just trying to capture the basis of the discussion, B1 and B2, and I'll have to have some conversation with Mr. Duffy about how TDR applies to something like this.
But really, it's all business. I don't know if B1, B2, or B3 matters. They're almost the same thing, so it's all business zoned. I would say them all. Because what's the difference between the two? The only difference between B1 and B2 is a little bit of lot coverage. I think it's 60 and 75, or just a small amount of lot coverage. But the uses are all the same. And the Cape Cod Commission also does allow for caps development at 10,000 square feet, but if you put mixed use, they let you put another 10,000 square feet on the second floor.
But the operative term here would be the priority for a mixed-use development.
Mixed use is the operative.
Yeah.
I think that's the main point. I'm not saying we have to build more. It's the mixed use is that would cover Spring Bars Road, it would cover the village centers, it would cover everything we're talking about. So maybe it's just mixed use, and that's only allowed in the business districts anyway, so, right?
Just a point of information, did the Board of Selectmen intend these to be in priority order, or are they all of equal priority, they could think about anything?
They are not.
They are
ranked.
not.
To the best of my knowledge, I don't believe they are ranked. And to get to this point, what we did as part of the working group at looking at the neutral flow, and these are largely staff members on site, I went through our local comprehensive plan and pulled out everything out of the local comprehensive plan that was a preference in order to sort of make this priority list. So I went through the local comprehensive plan and said we'd have things like this. And so everything in the LCP, I copied and pasted that as a bullet point for consideration for those priorities. The second thing that we did is we looked around to see who else had something like this, and we found a bylaw from Provincetown, how they did their process. So those are sort of a couple of the tenets that we put into this mix that Mr. Duffy, Peter Jones-Straub, and I and others have been working on in putting this policy together. But because of the hearing for the hotel, there's pretty much an immediate need for a policy, and so we understand that this is a policy we put together that we'll continue to look at, and that's why our comments tonight about what do you think about this policy and what are those things we might include in it as well.
And as it was applied to the hotel situation, what happened?
I don't know.
Still
I wasn't
don't
at the
know.
meeting.
Not.
For the record, I have nothing to do with that hotel.
You would have left the room.
Anything else on flow neutral? For this evening, at least.
So the game plan will be will be a joint meeting with the selectmen on that
Yeah, I'll
issue.
report back to this and we'll pick it up from there.
I think I heard them call for that.
Okay,
Anyways.
excellent.
I watched that meeting. Okay, moving on to the next discussion, Cape Club Covenant. I need some help with this. What is it?
All right. So
Some of the people who are here to talk about it left. Those are Ballymead people here, right there.
Oh, were they?
Oh, you're here for it, okay.
No wonder why you were hanging around.
So,
I've actually spoken
Twice.
You've been an integral part of tonight's discussion.
I thought we dealt with this already, didn't we?
I don't know, it's on the agenda.
So in the decision, the May 10th, 2017 decision for a special permit and a definitive plan for planned residential development, this particular development, Cape Club, I think is what it's being called now. The condition that the board granted was prior to the endorsement of the definitive plan, a covenant creating a homeowners association should be submitted to the planning board for approval. Also, a suitable covenant restricting the on-site open space for recreation and open space purposes only shall be delivered to and approved by the planning board prior to the definitive plan endorsement. Said covenants be recorded with the definitive plan prior to the definitive endorsement. Prior to the definitive plan, endorsement of a suitable bond or covenant shall be submitted ensuring completion of the roadways and utilities. So what they have presented to us is the standard covenant, which we typically would have, that basically says, the undersigned being the developer will not sell or convey any lots in the subdivision or erect or place on any permanent buildings on the lot until the construction of ways and installation of municipal services necessary, et cetera, are provided. So the covenant is the standard covenant that we received from them. They also gave us the subdivision covenants. This is the covenants between the residents of the development and the developer. Those things like you can't have a clothesline, all those sort of nuances that, frankly, the planning board doesn't have any business in, but the decision said, we'd love to see the covenants. I asked Mr. Duffy, I said, do you feel a need to review these? He said, not unless the planning board thinks I do. None of us think that we need to be reviewing the covenants between the residents and the developer, but you asked for it.
We did?
But it says in the decision. So we have it, and we have the covenant for the development as well. That said, what the developers would like to have, or the engineers would like to have, is the Mylar signed that the covenant is in place, so they can record the Mylar and the covenants, and they can get busy building the development. So I've had a couple meetings with, a couple conversations with Mr. McGrath, who I met last week. His reputation precedes him, by the way, and I was not disappointed. So we had a conversation about what have we got, what do we have to put together here, and I'm satisfied with it. Mr. Duffy is satisfied that he would review it if you needed him to, but it's our standard covenant. So I think that they've complied with those conditions.
Anyone need to review them?
I'm just trying to think of what we had discussed. Was there something about golf carts being allowed to drive through there? Between one of the holes and the other holes?
That's specifically allowed to cross the open space.
That's the only thing I can remember that would have any concern.
It was the phrase that allows the,
So it's allowed?
yes.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any other concerns.
I was present at all the meetings, so I don't recall any issues.
They, I believe, took care of all of the
Yeah.
issues that we had.
Right. But the covenants, they said,
There was an issue of sort of like a street or a lane or something that crossed, and it didn't make a lot of sense to us. It looked sort of dangerous, and I believe they took care of that.
They adjusted it.
Yeah.
Well, at this point, they have an approved subdivision that the planning board has approved, and the appeal period wasn't appealed. So we're not revisiting the subdivision necessarily. We're revisiting those conditions. Give us the covenant.
just the covenants.
We have the covenant. We're good with the covenant according to the conditions prior to the endorsement of the definitive plan, which I have here for your endorsement. The covenant creating that homeowners association, the suitable covenants, as I discussed before. We have those in place, and I think, in my opinion, and in discussing this with Mr. Duffy, that we're good to go with signing of the subdivision plan. In addition to that, as part of my conversations with the engineering department, and in conversations I had with Mr. McGrath and Kelly Cordoza, who's the agent, thank you, we talked about something apparently we don't do in Falmouth very often, is a pre-construction conference. So we've now given them permission to build a subdivision, and they have conditions to build those subdivisions. So the next thing that I would typically do is sit down with the developer and the contractors and make sure everybody understands what the conditions are and make sure what the phasing is, so everybody's on the same page before they get started. and also work with our engineering department, because there are inspections required in subdivisions in our engineering department. And we'll have a longer conversation about some of the things that the engineering department would like to see us address in our subdivision regulations. But at this point, I think having the pre-construction conference so everybody understands what's going on before they get started is crucial to making a successful development. And so nobody can say, I didn't know.
And you started off by saying that the neighborhood and the developer have worked out everything and they're both happy with these covenants.
Well, and frankly, I didn't read that entire notebook, but they're fairly standard in form. Where you put, where your landscaping is, your yard, where you put your shed at and things like that. And this is an agreement between the buyer of the property and the seller of the property, and not necessarily with us, but we asked for them, so we have the subdivision covenants and we have the planning board's covenants that they can't release, they can't sell any lots until the road's been in, it's inspected, and we do the lot release later on to say, you're now free to sell lots because you've complied with the requirements for building the subdivision.
I have two questions. Mr. Bott, well, no, one is for you, Jim. When was the site plan approved? What's the date of that? Do you recall?
A while ago.
I wasn't here.
No, 2 years ago? Almost?
Yeah.
This is May 10th, 2017, the letter that I have.
Right, so this is quite a while coming back with the covenant. I just wondered when that had happened. But the other is actually a question. I wonder, this, Tom and I had a chance to talk about this afternoon, the pre-construction conference, which sounds like such a great idea, a wonderful idea. And I wonder how that new practice affects the as-built issue that Mr. Palmer brought up, because his department will now be involved in the pre-construction conference, and it will aid him, I would think, later in the inspections.
Well, let me say that we've been having a discussion about a pre-construction conference for a subdivision and not specifically for a site plan. I have not had, in my practice, a pre-construction conference for a site plan. But I'm not saying that it shouldn't happen. But certainly for the subdivisions, because there's an awful lot of work and an awful lot of clearing that goes into building a road in a subdivision and things
Right.
like that.
We don't get that many subdivisions anymore.
We actually have a representative from the applicant here. Mike, you?
The subdivision regulations require an as-built plan be filed before release. So you'll get an actual as-built plan of the roadway.
Anyway, okay.
Well, do we need to do anything or just
Sign the plan,
sign the plan?
and then we will give the plan and the covenant to
How
the
many
developer.
signatures do we need on it?
A majority.
Okay. You want to do that now?
Does it require a motion?
No, that's what I asked. He said.
I think it's perfectly fine to make a motion. The planning board finds the application, the subdivision plan is in compliance with the decision from May 10th, and hereby authorizes signature for however you want to.
He can't make a motion.
So moved.
So moved. But
He
Second.
did it,
Second.
okay.
Second. It's moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
All right. So if it's fine with you, as we get ready to adjourn, I'll just have you sign it so we don't have to get
Before
up.
we
and-
leave, we'll get it all signed and get it
Yeah,
done.
I will station someone at the door to make sure we
Very
get it
good.
signed.
I think Mike's going to stay there.
Okay.
Okay, committee reports. Pat?
This is on the accessory apartment temporary working group. And we're going to meet again on the 20th, but this is what came out of the prior one that we had, which, what the heck date was that? The 4th, something like that, 6th, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Tom did a copy of it and inserted comments here. There's been a good bit of discussion about having a minimum lot size. Right now, it seems like maybe 7,500. So that's just been thrown out there, but nothing has been decided at this point as to whether there should be a minimum lot size, not a minimum lot size. A good deal of the reason for a minimum lot size hinges on parking. because if you go to very small lots, you're going to have the parking on the streets, even though we don't want parking on the streets. So there's a good argument even in that alone. Then we also have, how do you determine the square footage of the dwelling? And we decided as measured using the exterior wall. So that gets away from, what do you count? Do you count a bathroom? Do you count a stairwell? No, it's just the exterior wall of the building. There were a couple of other things that were brought up, and this is, how do you count it if it's a Cape
Half story.
cottage?
What about a half story,
half-story?
3/4 story? That's the issue I brought up. The assessors have a formula for that.
Mhm.
A little Cape only has 75 or maybe 50%. If it has no dormers, the second floor is only 50% of the first floor.
Well, it was discussed as
Is that going to be double now?
discussed as to whether we should just double the footprint of the first floor, whether there should be a formula. Bob spent a good deal of time.
Yeah, I'm opposed to just doubling it. I think upstairs it's finished wall to finished wall. Because, even the smallest Cape is going to be allowed to build an 800 square foot structure. And I think 800 square feet is too big. When you're looking at 800 square feet, 2 bedrooms, that's $1,400 to $1,600 a month. It's not really going to do much to create affordable housing, which is one of the things that we wanted to do. And also, 800 square foot footprint for a single-story dwelling, most of them are going to be bigger than the typical Cape.
And that was discussed
And
too.
it looks like you've subdivided a single lot into 2 separate one-family dwellings. And we swore up and down that we wouldn't let that happen. And so I think we should have a reduction in the square footage. When you think of 800 square feet, that's pretty big. I grew up in an apartment with 7 of us and, 950 square feet. So, Americans like a lot of space. But if you want to create affordable housing, we talked about the market dictating it. If you have a little 400 square foot apartment, it's not going to command $1,600 a month. So I think we need to look at the amount of square footage that we're allowing. And that might be done by the percentage, go back to the 30% that the original bylaw had as opposed to 40%. So there's a couple moving parts there.
So
And-
that's still up for discussion.
Yeah, I still want to discuss
Definitely
it.
exterior walls, though.
Yeah, because we were going by the definition in the code book, which said gross leasable floor space is counted from exterior wall,
Well, and
exterior
Tom
faces.
found a good number of,
Yeah, and Rod Palmer said the same thing, that it should be from the footprint, the outside of the
Right.
walls. Because, that's what he's dealing with.
and the thickness of the walls
And the
doesn't,
thickness of the walls doesn't
it's
count.
de minimis.
Yeah. So, when you have one permit that goes through and it was going by habitable space, and on the primary residence, everything was included in habitable space, but in the accessory structure, it was not counted, you can't have that discrepancy. It just,
So you just do a very simplistic exterior walls,
yeah.
no argument.
And then come up with something for the second floors.
What's the real question is, the assessors have the formula for a second floor. They already do that.
Yeah.
Do you want to use theirs or do you want to make up a new one?
Well, we keep hearing how complicated the assessors.
You keep saying how complicated.
I don't know, it isn't. It isn't complicated. There's an accessory code book, and they tell you what, it's
The
either
question is,
50%,
how
75, or 90.
accessible is that to a homeowner?
You walk into the assessors, you ask, can I see the plan? They pull out the code and they tell you right there.
Okay, so that's something that we've talked about, a brochure. That could be information that's put in the
In there,
brochure.
how to
How to
calculate it.
calculate.
The
your-
assessors, you can go online and just ask for the assessor's code, and
Yeah.
they're right there.
Yeah.
It's a statewide or national-wide code that the assessors all use for this issue. I'll go along with every one of you guys says.
Yeah,
I'm just
yeah.
familiar with this one.
Yeah,
It's one I know, but
yeah.
I don't have a
Yeah.
problem.
We need
I don't think
something
you can
that's-
double the floor, though, because
No.
what we're talking about is
I know, I
the
don't-
scale would greatly increase.
Right.
You can build 2.5 stories here, you know?
No,
So,
I'm not in
Yeah.
favor of that. I'm just telling you the permutations that were discussed.
Yeah.
And no
If-
definitive decision.
if we go by the assessor's code, when you want to see how big the house is, you look up the assess, it's right there in the books, it's there.
Yeah,
The assessors does the outside dimensions.
yeah.
But yet Rod says the assessors do it for their own reasons, and it's not necessarily accurate.
I disagree. The assessors have this formula, and
I know
it's,
they
and
do.
it's done by roof line.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and it makes sense. A gambrel
Yeah.
is 90%,
Yeah.
okay? A standard cape is like only 50%. A cape with dormers is 75%.
Yeah.
And they have a code for it, and each one of these codes has a number that's associated with it.
Then to make it very simplistic, we have to, if we want to do it in that manner, we have to put that in our bylaw, so that there's
Yeah.
no
Right.
argument.
Absolutely, you can publish the code.
Yeah,
There's only 4 different roof lines they describe,
yeah.
and I don't remember
Yeah.
what they are,
But
but they
that's-
all have a number associated with them.
It would have
And
to
then
be
we're
put
all
in.
talking the same number.
Yes.
And anyone can go online and say, my house says 2,000 square feet, that's what the assessors say, the
Yeah.
math, then that's what we based on, remember,
Yeah.
2,000
Yeah.
square foot house.
Yeah.
And then what's 40% of 2,000 feet, is it
Yeah.
800 feet? I mean,
Yeah.
that's where the math came
Yeah,
from.
yeah.
And
Okay, the total number of bedrooms on the lot shall not exceed 4 when the lot contains less than 20,000 square feet. Now, it was brought out that there are a number of very large houses on some of these lots that might have even up to 6 bedrooms. And what do? Take away bedrooms? And the answer was no, what you do is you add in existing dwelling in excess of 4 bedrooms may convert up to 2 bedrooms into 1 accessory unit.
Yeah.
And just, you're not telling them to take away bedrooms to get an accessory unit, but they can't add any bedrooms
Yeah.
either.
Yeah.
So that made a lot of sense there, because you've seen the nice old big houses that have that in.
Yeah, I know somebody's got an 8,000 square foot house and they're trying to put an accessory apartment in it.
Yeah, well,
But 800 square feet is only 10%.
Yeah, only 10%.
So that seems reasonable if you
Yeah.
look at it from that perspective.
Yeah,
okay, the consensus of the group is approval for accessory housing should be by 1 board, not 2. Remember, they have to split it here if it's a
yeah.
separate building. The question is which board? If it is the ZBA, then section 5A would need to be amended. Now, the zoning board of appeals really does not want it to come back to the planning board, because they do all these special permits for all kinds of things. What Bob Dugan suggested is that their board and our board and the Board of Selectmen, all 3 boards sit down together. That may be an impossibility to get anything like that going on.
Yeah.
But perhaps representatives of both boards, and maybe a couple of the selectmen might sit in, but I also think this is my own opinion, it did not come up, is that I think members of that working group need to sit in too, to fully understand.
Are you
What?
talking about when somebody's applying?
Yeah.
No, I'm talking in this process, to determine, all
Oh,
right.
to determine
To
who's gonna be the,
determine who's gonna be the permitting
Yeah.
group. Because what happens is, as you are all well aware, we have design review and site plan review.
So we'll be giving that to the zoning board of appeals.
No, we
No,
can't.
no,
But
can't.
what we could do is give them that limited capacity here to say, in this instance only, you will do site plan review and design review.
Wasn't the
And-
way it was originally done, though?
Well,
Because
here's
it was
my
new, it
concern.
was going
When
to
we went
stay
to
with the
town-
planning board?
When we went to town meeting,
Not
five
originally, no.
members of the zoning board gave presentations against this bylaw. They wanted to make all these changes, brought it up, passed on voice vote, 2/3 right away, over. The zoning board does not like this bylaw. They've always been trying to change it.
Bob Dugan was very surprised at how many units actually came about under the original accessory apartment bylaw. It was 260, I think, something like that. It was a fairly good number since the institution of that original bylaw. I was surprised when he said that. So it's not that it has not been used, but we were trying to make it a little bit more streamlined. Many of the things in our current bylaw are from the original bylaw. So,
Well, I tend to agree with Rod, who said that most towns, it's one board, and it's the planning board that issues a special permit. It isn't like we don't grant special permits.
right.
We've
It's
been
not
sued over a
rocket
number of
science.
special permit situations, so,
Mhm.
you know, I think we have the experience, and I think, you know, we wrote the bylaw, and I think we should be the ones to front it, and hearing comments about how onerous the process was, and, you know, you don't have somebody that shows up, you don't have a quorum, and it gets delayed, and I think we need to keep it in one house.
Well, I do think it would be instructional for members of our board and the ZBA, not necessarily the entirety of the boards, to sit down together, and that we should have members of the working group too, so that they can see how it's being argued by both boards.
Yeah.
You mean in order to finalize changes to it? Not
Correct.
in order to administer it, but to, right.
To, if we're going to change it to one board, then is that going to be the planning board, or is that going to be the ZBA? And remember,
I agree with
this
Bob,
is.
it should stay with the planning board,
Well, it
particularly
doesn't,
in
it's
light of
not
what Jim is
staying
saying.
with it though, because right now the ZBA has a special permitting.
You know, and
For
I
a
was the one that
detached-
kept
for a
fighting the-
detached
For
dwelling.
detached, yes.
I was the one that
Yeah.
fought for the lot size. Remember, they really wanted to do 10,000, I said no. But you said something, I think, that would change that. These big old houses that have 6 bedrooms,
Right.
if they could be exempt, and then the 7,200 square foot thing starts to make sense.
Well, they were throwing out 75.
Well, 75.
Stop taking away 300 square feet.
75, but what I was trying to protect is the big old houses that were on the sewer, and they say you can't do it. And that's
wrong.
wrong. We should be converting those things.
And a 20,000 square foot lot is going to have ample space for parking as well.
Well, they're saying a 7,000 square foot lot. now.
No. What this
The
is.
minimum lot size, I thought was
It's
7,500.
3E. The total number of bedrooms on the lot shall not exceed 4
Right.
when the lot contains less than
Okay,
20,000
right.
square feet. So that's
Unless
less
it already
than
has it.
20,000, unless it already has in excess, in which case 2 of those existing bedrooms.
And then we all
Can be
agree
converted.
that 7,500 is a good number? I mean, I was
It got
against
thrown
it.
out.
The reason why I was against it is because, well, it goes away when you're on the sewer.
Yeah, except it doesn't necessarily, because you've got 4,000 and 5,000 square foot lots and trying to get adequate
Parking.
parking
Yeah.
on a
Right,
lot
the
that
parking.
size.
Yeah.
That's the biggie right
Yeah.
there.
And we've said over and over that there are disqualifiers in this. And if you can't park, and the bylaw talks about parking.
On-site parking.
On-site parking.
Not on-street parking.
Right, but people didn't feel that was specific enough. And so, I don't know, do we include parking spaces as lot coverage or something? I don't know.
I think to give them the 7,500 square feet is the concession
It's
to make that
a
happen.
good concession.
Yeah.
At 7,500 square feet may not be sufficient anyway. If they
Well,
have
when
a weirdly configured lot and they have
Yeah.
to put a septic system on it that,
When we discussed it before, I think it was you, Jim, you were saying, this is several months ago now, that the 75 square feet, there's really not room for a bigger septic system and the
There
parking
isn't, but-
anyway. You can't
but-
do it.
But a 7,000 square foot lot on the septic system might actually work, and we're going to prohibit it because of, if
Right.
we make this change. But there's not going to be that many of them. I think no bylaw's going to be perfect. We've got to figure out something. And if the group says that's the number, I think we've got to go along with them to do that.
in my mind, a very good argument to not keep, but to
To
bring
have.
back the special permitting to the planning board is that we're trying to keep it streamlined. We want to understand where the issues might come up, because we are the ones who write this bylaw.
Because we could do it in one meeting.
Mhm.
Like we have with the ones that are within a structure. We've approved those in one meeting.
Right.
site plan and design review. So I don't see what the big stretch is if it's detached. And we're looking at the criteria.
And we're not gonna give up design review.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So they're gonna be coming to us anyway.
Yeah.
So by
So-
default, if it's gonna be one board, it has to be us.
I mean, this isn't a 100-room hotel
Well,
that
no,
we're
it
talking
doesn't.
about.
Because you could give it in the instance of a separate building to the ZBA, but only in that instance. It doesn't spread out all over the place.
So-
We do have that.
So we would still be doing design review.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, we would not. To keep
See,
it
yeah, see, and
streamlined. And that's what makes it complex.
Yeah, because then people are going, okay, what board do I go? It goes back to the two historical things. Okay, do I go to districts or do I go to, you know?
But
so-
why make it that complicated?
I know,
Why not
that's
just
what-
keep the
that's-
whole thing
Keep the whole thing.
with one board, and that
Right.
board is the
Right.
board that originated the bylaw?
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Because, like I said, I don't really see the big difference between detached and one that's included in the main dwelling. It's-
Okay, I have passed on all of this, including the desire of the ZBA,
yeah.
as said to the group by Bob Dugan, that we come together to discuss this. He included the selectmen in the discussion. I'm not sure that that's necessary.
No.
Okay,
But I do
taking the
think
step
that,
of bringing everybody all together would mean that we're open to discussing it going somewhere else. And I am not. Others might be, but
I don't know.
I'm
I
not
think
sure
you
that
start,
that's a
you know,
whole- we don't need to do
Camel's a
it.
horse designed by committee, and I think you start getting into that.
you're right.
well, we already have it gone someplace else. Unless we have a good discussion and bring it back to the planning board, we will have a fight on town meeting floor for the change.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I keep bringing up the fact that we are not changing the bylaw, we're doing what we refer to as housekeeping.
Mhm.
We're changing a few phrases here and there that we don't want to get into redoing the entire bylaw.
Remember how hard we worked and how Brian made us wait
Yeah.
2 years and have all kinds of hearings
Yeah,
with town meeting members and all this stuff. Who's gonna do that for these changes?
Mhm. John, you were a member many years ago of the ZBA. You haven't said anything about this. Do you want to? Or do you want to just?
No, I don't want to talk about that, but
Okay.
I don't think we should change anything. I like the bylaw, the way it's written. It's being used. If it's a structure that's not attached, the zoning board has the purview. And if it's inside the structure, it's our purview. I don't see why it's not working. I really don't want to change the lot size to 7,500 square feet. I mean, like Bob said, we're gonna do the review anyway. And that's what we talked about before. It was even fully written, that this board would review every site. And if parking was a problem,
yeah.
it wouldn't get approved.
So we just do site plan and the applicant has to come before two boards if it's a separate building.
And if the septic's been the problem, if that's been resolved, maybe we'll see more use of this bylaw. We really haven't seen a lot of usage of
Right.
it.
I think first of all, I watch every single zoning board that does accessory apartment. And what I've seen happen, it's the NIMBY. People are looking for ways to stop it. Some of these things, I've seen the biggest arguments on multi-million-dollar homes with garages that have all kinds of room and room for plenty of septic systems, but they don't want a rental unit in their neighborhood. And they are looking at ways to stop it. I have not seen anybody in a modest home with a little garage that just fits, that anyone's given them any trouble. It's been lawyers finding ways to use our bylaw to stop things.
Well, John, you would agree, I would think, you say you want to keep it as it is, but I would assume you would agree with how you measure it
Yes.
to get the square footage.
I agree with that.
And then
yes.
also houses that have,
Yes,
you know, the 20,000.
Right.
that would be.
Okay.
And then what I like about it is if they had 6 bedrooms already, that you can convert 2 of them inside and you don't have to worry about. Okay, you know what I'll do is I will go to the assessors and make a little table with these codes that I'm talking about and
Okay.
give them you to take to the board.
Okay.
And so I'll make sure that everybody
Yeah.
has them.
Yeah.
They are, I found them and used them, but other people have not found them, but they're there.
Because they don't deal with math very readily.
Yeah, I for one feel the ZBA is overworked, and I'm trying to give
We
them a
need
little
to
break.
work a little bit,
You
yeah.
know?
Well, you should see how long they're pushing meetings out.
Oh, I know, yeah.
They're talking August.
Yeah, yeah,
We're gonna put more of these on there? That's the
Yeah.
other thing.
Yeah.
That right now, if you look at the ZBA schedule on projects, they're into August and almost talking September.
yeah. I mean, this is
Want
small
to get,
fish, I think, you know.
get an accessory apartment bylaw caught up in that mess?
Okay, so let's just say this working group is going to flip a coin and decide, does it stay exactly as it is, that the ZBA has the special permitting authority, or does the planning board bring it back under their own roof?
Why flip a coin when there are good arguments to be made for?
Because everybody has
Make
their
the
own argument.
But it's worth making it.
Mhm.
Well, you want to talk about it? I mean, John doesn't want to change it. Right?
But the reason was to make this simple and easy,
Yeah, and that's why
to
we wanted.
streamline it and to have it get used. That was the reason behind it.
Right.
That was the reason for it not to go to the zoning board.
Oh, but it does go to the zoning
If,
board,
if
right?
it's,
It's detached,
if it's
yeah,
They're
detached.
yeah.
And I have no problem with that.
Oh, you don't?
No,
Okay.
so he wants to leave the bylaw same. So the special, let's talk in specific terms. Special permit granting authority inside the structure,
It's already us,
planning board.
yeah.
Yes.
We're gonna leave the special permit granting authority for an accessory structure with the ZBA.
See, and I don't want to see that.
And what is
I-
it?
I want to see us do both.
Okay.
I don't see why we can't do both,
All right.
because, like I
Let's-
said.
what do you
we've-
think?
We've done,
I'm with Bob on this. I absolutely don't understand why we're not doing both.
Paul, what's your thoughts?
Well, I think they're unwilling to give up the special permit. I think they want to control that. But I think it makes sense for the planning board to do it.
Well,
It's the same function.
Pat's trying to get,
It's the same
you
function.
gotta pick a spot, you gotta be yes
No,
or
I'm saying,
no.
I think the planning board should do it.
He's saying
Yeah,
the
but-
planning
Board
board.
should do it.
And how do you feel?
I'm quite torn on it, but I really would like to see, I think, our board do it. Because if the idea was to make it simpler, in all instances, it makes it simpler to have the planning board do
The
the
only
whole thing.
argument I've heard for the detached approvals to go to the zoning board of appeals is a political one that will have a harder time because they don't want it to change that. But there's not a rational reason beyond the political one. From the standpoint of applicants trying to get an accessory apartment done, and for the public to understand how the whole thing works, having it come to a single board and be the board that originated it
yeah.
makes the most sense.
That could be
That's the
done
most
in
rational
one
way
night,
Right.
to
one
do it.
meeting.
And there's not that great a distinction, and there's actually a very substantive reason for it to come and be part of our thinking on site plan review, because what we've found is the whole thing about the detached is the relationship of that detached structure to
Exactly.
the original building, both geographically, in space and in style. And that, all those conversations and thinking and finding out where we are as a board, that's already happened here. It hasn't happened there. It's going to be easier for applicants for detached structure, accessory apartments, for it to be with the planning board. And I think that we should argue for the reasonable thing, because the political thing, that's only short term. That's how are we going to get this through. But once it's through, how are people going to have to deal with it? We should think more on a longer game than that. That's what I think.
You convinced me. That's a good point.
Those are your points.
Okay, so the next meeting is on the 20th at 4 o'clock of the temporary working group. And Bob and I will both be there
Yeah.
representing this, our discussion.
Yeah,
And ask me, I will, what day is it?
June 20th.
Okay, I will go get it done this week. I'll get you the table
Okay,
from the assessor's records, and
Okay.
I'll get
Okay.
it. Because if you look at so the folks you know about it, when you look at the assessor's card, there's a plan, and that plan has a bunch of alphabet, like BAS, QED, you gotta know what those codes mean, but the codes have numbers that go with them, and if you put it all on one little table, everyone knows it. And then we're not, then the town's doing everything alike. I really like doing it the way the assessors do it, because it's a process, it's in place, and it's online.
Yeah.
What you're saying has an application to the guidebook that we said we were going to try to do
Yes.
for, but it also, I think, has an implication, a very big one, for the remake of the zoning book, because now, nothing is in one place.
Right.
It's in the zoning bylaws, it's in the building code, it's in practice that hasn't been codified, as Mr. Palmer brought up to us today. I think it should be an overall goal for the rewrite of our zoning book to make it easy to bring those things together, so that you're not fishing for them and discovering as a builder or as an owner down the road, whoa, I didn't even know anything about that, and nobody told me.
Didn't
It
find
should-
that little paragraph when I was looking.
Right.
Yeah.
So it should be an overriding policy, I guess, of the way the new code book gets put together, that it brings together all of the pertinent information that controls a project, right in one place. Be great. And it would be electronic and online, and you could look it up.
Other committee reports? Yes.
Davis Straits.
Well, that's
Multifamily.
That's its own report. This is committee reports.
Oh, sorry. I thought we were a committee.
No, well, you are, but in case anybody else, like John,
Got a stand-up position.
you're on the CPC, right?
Yes, I
Do you have
am.
anything to report, new activity there?
Not this evening.
I'm no longer on whatchamacallit,
EDIC.
EDIC, so I
He's
won't.
forgotten already.
Look at his grin.
No, I went to the meeting this morning. I'm still gonna go to the meetings occasionally. I don't have to stay there for all the hours. And the only focus that we talked about was the station again. And, you know, we did create a new organization called the Friends of Falmouth Station. It's gonna be to raise money and to run special events and other things, not to maintain it, but to do other events there.
They've got a lunch sign out there.
Yes,
Yeah, I
they're,
met the owner.
oh, they put a great,
Yeah.
there's a really cool, what's it called, the Station Grill.
Yeah.
And he's open from 10 to 5, and he solved, well, we solved the problem at the EDIC. We told him you gotta go get the force sink thing. They could never get the building permit because of the plumbing issue and everything, but they make this, I mentioned this thing online you can get, and they went out and bought it, paid $2,000 for it. It's a compartmentalized, it has the 4 sinks, it has a heater, and it gets them through the building code, the Board of Health code
Oh.
situation, so it's like a plug, they just move it in, and you can have
It's a plug-in kitchen.
a plug-in kitchen, passes the Board of Health, they got it inspected. But
Wow.
it was a $2,000 piece of hardware. And so I encourage people to go there. I actually went there, had lunch today, it was good. There's tables outside. In the summertime, there'll be more events.
Yeah.
It'll be great for the bikers.
The bikers, so
Yeah.
that, you know, that was always part of the goal, but it was hard to find somebody. This individual invested a lot of his own money. He spent he spent about $20,000 to get all the stuff to move in. And the EDIC is not even charging him rent, he just wants to get him started. And if he starts to make money, we'll work it out later.
Yeah.
But it's pretty cool, it's happening.
Terrific.
Is he gonna be open year-round or just a summer?
Hope so, that's the plan.
Yeah. He was
Because
saying that
Peter
eventually they'd
Pan
like to do
closes
mornings
early
to-
in the
for
wintertime.
morning commuters.
Yeah.
Okay, you wanna report on the coastal resiliency?
Please.
Coastal Resiliency went forward with the MVP program, and they were far enough along that it was determined that they can apply for a grant from the state for additional work. And town meeting approved $80,000 for a modeling study on the area, and the intent of the committee was to pull that back, use that as local funding, and see if they get a much larger fund, about $300,000. Last week it was turned down for a number of reasons, not quite sure all the reasons. Sandwich did get a grant, a number of others did as well. But, so now the intent is to go forward with a request for proposal for the modeling study, the hydrodynamic model, and move forward because it was approved 8 months ago at town meeting. So they're going to move forward on that. The second part is there was a presentation by John Ramsey from Applied Coastal on the Minot Beach area, and he's going to finish his report by the end of this month. So there should be a presentation on what he's planning on doing in Minot Beach, probably beginning of July.
Is that the opening of the channel to 90 feet? Is that in the mix still?
Well, that's part of what he's looking at. He's also looking at a potential groin there. They would take groins out to see if that would establish, capture some of the sand. So it was a pretty good presentation with him. Actually see what his recommendations are.
Very good. Well, that's an engineered beach, boy, in my lifetime. We've changed that a lot. They moved it used to be, the channel was moved 100 yards. It used to be much, much further to the west. There used to be an old wooden bridge. We used to clam underneath it. In the 80s, they moved it in the middle. Totally changed the beach, huge construction, and now they're talking about making that opening from 60 feet to 90 feet. So they're, in my lifetime, they've totally changed that thing. Sandbars are moving, everything's happening.
Why'd they do it?
Somebody thought it was a good idea.
Well, the original intent was to have that bridge 100 feet wide. And for funding reasons, maybe it wasn't funding reason, but for other reasons, they reduced it to 50. So now they want to open up to get a better flow.
Right. So was the cost of the bridge, that they narrowed it down, yeah.
Well, I thought it was cost of bridge. They said it was some other reasons as well, but I'm not sure what they all are.
But they're talking, that bridge was built, I remember I was, I was 40 years old when they did it, and it's now old again.
Personally painful.
Yeah. I used to be able to go to sleep at night listening to the cars going over the old wooden bridge. It would go thump, 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 thump. That's my childhood memory. That bridge has been gone for 40, well, it was in the 80s, I think. It's almost 40 years now. Next, Davis Straits Multifamily District.
Okay, two things. One, nothing has happened since, and that is my concern. When Pat and Pam and I met with the staff people downstairs in the building department, it seemed one of the things we talked about, first of all, they were patting us on the back for having this meeting, how great it is that we're talking to one another, we should be doing this all the time, and we discussed, well, you know, our next step ought to be that we will come up with some drafts of what the multifamily zoning bylaw might contain, maybe not a complete thing, but as it was growing, and we would be back to you. And it was suggested that, well, why? You don't have to hold a separate meeting. Those people meet together regularly. Peter Johnson Staub convenes them on a morning, once a month, and we could simply schedule it for after that meeting because they're already all together. So now that we have, although we did not have a thorough discussion, we did begin to discuss the draft that we came up with of what could be contained in it, what the standards might be. And I just want to bring to the board that we should be picking up on that and go to Peter Johnson Staub and say, we're ready to do that. Sorry there's been such a long lapse. We were waiting for a new director. He's here. And now we would like to come and bring this to you. And let's have that discussion move forward, because we seem to have stalled, and that was definitely going to be the next step.
We have something coming up that might at least give us how these buildings are going to look. Isn't the Cape Cod Commission coming? You want to talk about that? That's why you moved to that seat?
As I moved here against my
You're
will.
out.
Against my will.
Oh,
Yes, so the Cape Cod Commission was given a grant by the state to do this community resiliency by design. So they chose 3 towns as case studies, and one was Falmouth, and they were going to use the Davis Straits District, the Davis Straits Reset Study, as a case study to potentially, illustrate what could happen here design-wise, or what sort of zoning changes could happen to accommodate a mixed-use district to help redevelop the area, and using 3D modeling and design to show you what potentially could happen here.
right. And I had already read about that and put it on my calendar. I think it's phenomenal, but it's not, and of course we'll go, but I don't think that it really replaces discussions here among the local people. I think that one augments the other, but I think another presentation by the Cape Cod commission people is going to be fascinating. I can see the direction they're going in, but it's not going to get to the level that we had already sort of worked on and could find out more about what do we think. And it's really who's included in this we. There's us, but there's also the people who work full-time on this and have a pile of experience who are downstairs in the building department and in the zoning office. And it seems very useful to me that we would make use of that resource as much as we can.
Well, there'll be a few more community workshops based on this that will be in Falmouth. And there's Union Studio, it's a pretty good design firm out of Providence, will be working with town staff, people in the community to develop potentially what the forms could look like. So
Right. And
on
therefore,
top of, the planning board's engagement with the community and developing the bylaw out of this, or potentially out of this.
So Charlotte,
Yes.
what do we need to do? You're saying we're stuck, we're not doing anything. What's our next move? How do we move this along?
I thought our next step was to have some agreement among us as a board, or perhaps before or after, but certainly to know some input. And just as a refresher, the things that we had been talking about were coming up with the language that we would need for a bylaw. And you need to know lot sizes and density and heights and those kinds of things. And they won't be in conflict with what's being proposed to us, because we actually know pretty much what they're saying, because it's in the Davis Strait plan already. It's finding out what have we learned downstairs and adding to this, and picking up allies as it grows and changes. I think they're parallel tracks that inform one another,
Correct.
but don't preclude one another.
Right.
And what you're really saying, what I'm sort of hearing as a subtext is, oh, leave it to the Cape Cod Commission and the professionals over here. And I don't think that's
No,
appropriate. I think you've got
that's-
an elected board that could be useful in this.
That's not what I'm saying at all. Actually, this helps move it along a lot quicker, because they have the technology to help us with the design aspect, or
They do.
to illustrate the design. And that's really going to help move this forward.
Yeah, this is something.
You know what
I've
I'd
been
like to
asking
do?
about.
This
And if I
person-
may just attack from the other microphone, because I didn't mean to put Corey on the spot. My intent was to announce the joint meeting that we're having with the Cape Cod Commission on this planning process. I think the conversations I've had with the committee were about what sort of input have we had from the community, from the development community. Whatever sort of zoning we design and we develop, if we don't have some buy-in from the development community, it's just going to sit on a shelf. So every tool that we can use at our disposal to illustrate what might happen, what might be possible, is another tool to advance the mission of the Davis Straits Reset Plan. So no doubt we have to write zoning for it, and they're not writing zoning for us. But this is a tool to help illustrate what's possible, perhaps further engage the community that we didn't necessarily have as much of a robust response as we might have hoped for in our previous meetings about Davis Straits. So I think anything that we've got that we can launch a flare with, to wave a flag, to say, here's what we're looking at doing, here are some possibilities, here are some visuals, because the picture tells 1,000 words. So if we've got form-based codes and things that come out of that, and sustainable sort of things that we're looking at, those all add to the conversation and make for a better development in the long run.
I know what I'd like to hear from each member of the board. Just a question, non-binding. What do you think in the multifamily district the density should be? How many housing units? Right now, we have a cap of 6 in our town.
Right, and I don't think that that's appropriate at all. And what the Cape Cod Commission is saying is 12. And what we were told when we went for the Housing Assistance Corporation's seminars on multifamily housing, they're saying you can't really interest the developers for less than 20 to 25. So we've got these different things, and I think they need to be brought together in some way, but it's clear that the number needs to be well above 12, coming from the, at least I think so.
Many people think 6 is too many.
Yeah.
It depends on where.
Well,
It
you
depends
watch
on-
all the hearings, I watch them all.
No, I'm not disagreeing with you, Jim. I'm saying I think many people, and I would be among them, think 6 is too many in many places in Falmouth. This is a question of where. And we're talking about, I thought we were talking about Davis Straits.
On the sewer on Davis Straits.
On the sewer, on Davis Straits, near the stores, near the schools, where we want to see much higher density, but limited to that. And maybe, and we know from that first conversation that Pam and Pat and I had downstairs, that their inkling there, their urge there was, well, gee, if you're going to do that, why don't you put Davisville in now? Well, no, don't think so, because it makes the conversation bigger and more difficult. The more places you add, the more nervous people you collect.
Okay, I'm going to ask everybody for the number. Paul, what do you think the number is? I just want to see what the board thinks.
Well, there's a number of projects in town that are much higher densities than 12. Many more.
Oh, no, we've all seen it. I'm asking you your opinion.
I think it has to be higher than, certainly than 12, otherwise you're not going to get the attraction for development.
Pat?
Has to be higher than 12, but I think we also have to look at building heights.
Yes,
Yeah.
John?
Have to look away.
Building heights.
So
Building
how
height.
much acreage are we talking about in the Davis Straits area? 6 acres, 10 acres, 4 acres?
It's in the report. I don't remember, but it's 20, I think.
20 acres?
Yeah.
So if we did 20 per acre, that'd be 400 units.
That's pretty big.
Well, it's a pretty big area. 20 acres is a lot of land. And if it's on the second floor or third floor of
Yeah.
commercial buildings, isn't this what?
Right, I am. I know. I'm just trying to get the conversation around a number,
Well,
John.
I'm just saying,
not
you're
arguing
asking
either
me.
side.
I mean, all the studies say
Bob, what do you
we
think?
need housing.
I'm going to be a chicken. I'm going to say greater than 12.
that is chicken.
That's what I said.
Well, I think the design is gonna have a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
We keep using Oddfellows Hall, there's 4 units, which equates to 20 per acre, if you do the math on it. So I think the form of how this is gonna look would be less intimidating to people that might say, oh, 20 per acre was too much. But if you're talking about small units, 1-bedroom studios or small 2-bedroom units, then it's a different conversation. When people think, and I said this before, when you talk about 20 units, people think of 20-unit subdivisions that cover acres and acres and acres of single-family houses.
It's got to, we're also talking either mixed use or
Right.
the actual places on where we're building.
Yeah, I
bigger
mean, you can have a
buildings
mixed-use
downtown.
building next to more of an apartment type of
Yeah.
building, or townhouses or something like that.
Right.
So it's mixed use, not only building by itself, but the lot next to it.
And what we're also looking for, I believe, is a charming sort of style, too.
Right, and I think this is what Tom is trying to get at, but I don't see them as being in conflict with one another. Of course, the developers have to be part of the thinking about it, but doing the multifamily housing part of it and the detail on that isn't going to be about necessarily the form immediately. It will have to come together at some point. It doesn't preclude it. Holding conversations now about the multifamily doesn't cut off the involvement of the developers in the forms.
So if I may, back to the commercial that we previously scheduled. On the 20th, Wednesday, June 20th, we have a meeting scheduled, a joint meeting with the Cape Cod Commission. That starts this conversation, and or not starts this conversation, it continues this conversation that we are having. Essentially, these other folks are catching up with this conversation. So in there, the flyer, and it's on our website, it's on bulletin boards. What do you think more compact housing can look like? This is the visual. This is the thing that helps people understand it's not a sprawling subdivision. Join us for a community conversation. The Union Studios will look at looking at these market demands for what smaller housing units will look like and how they're supported by the infrastructures available in neighborhood amenities. So this is a tool from a very well-regarded design team that's going to bring to us pictures, graphics, and things that we're going to put together to tell the story. And I think the more tools you've got and the more images you've got and the more visual, it makes it easier for a town meeting to vote. Because any zoning change we're going to do is going to go to town meeting. It's going to require a 2/3 vote. So you want to bring all the tools and all the discussions you can to get you to that point. And I think this was serendipitously a grant that the Cape Cod Commission got. Corey has been the point person on this. He and I have been talking with them. There's been meetings with the Cape Cod Commission. starting this thing up. And that conversation, that continued conversation comes to Falmouth on the 20th, starting at 5:30. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing what they have to do, what they're proposing, how this process lays out. And I think it's a terrific opportunity for us to move forward with some of those things that we've got, both in the local comprehensive plan and as part of the Davis Straits plan.
And how many years have I been asking for this when we talked about visioning and
No,
and
it's-
having the modeling?
Oh,
and
it's
all
part
that?
of our original plan, it's
This
actually
is-
happening, so.
This is it.
So, but that's gonna be a planning board meeting, right? Are we gonna,
We are posted,
post it?
yep, June 20th, Cape Cod Commission, Union Studio,
And there's nothing on the agenda but this item,
that is it.
so we're not gonna be able to be taken off in other
That's it.
directions.
Hey, Jim. I think it's a great idea to get together. My initial reaction when I saw this is, we don't talk about compact housing on Davis Straits. Compact housing refers basically to Orleans. So my first reaction is, what is compact housing? When I look a little closer, they're talking about in Orleans, but we're talking about redevelopment of Davis Straits, which is not necessarily compact housing. Could be, but we're talking about multi-use housing along Davis Straits. So I got a very different impression when I first looked at this.
Yeah.
Well, there could be different parts of it. I mean, remember, some of our streets are gonna be retail, and there could be some that, in the interior, that could just be, some of these type houses could be just
Yeah.
infill.
Cottage court.
I don't believe the report discusses compact housing, per se.
No,
It could.
it discusses what it says, redevelopment and infill opportunities.
I didn't know the
Yeah.
definition of compact housing, I'm sorry.
Well, and I think there's no need for us to get that rigid and literal yet about the difference between compact and
I'm just saying,
cluster
the
and so
impression I
forth.
got was very different than what the Davis Straits report was when I first looked at it.
Oh.
That's all. I'm encouraged to do this, no question about it.
Uh-huh.
But it's, Davis Straits a lot more than compact housing.
It is.
Well, this is just a flyer that's advertising two different workshops,
Yeah,
that's all.
it's just a workshop thing.
Yeah, we're not talking about in Falmouth compact housing, that's for Eastham and Orleans.
So if I may, Mr. Chairman, if I can recap, we're having a meeting Wednesday, June 20th, to bring tools to help further the desires of the planning board and the Davis Straits and our local comprehensive plan. I would encourage anyone in the public and the viewing public to come to the meeting and see what's up. I think it's going to be very exciting, and it's great to have skilled people whose day job is this to look at these sort of designs and things like that. So I think there's a lot of upside for the town. And I'm sure the board is going to be here, and I encourage the public and business owners to come as well. And we've done a lot of outreach through Corey and Melinda, who've been sending this information out to folks and trying to spread the word as much as we can, which is why I wanted to discuss it tonight for our viewing audience, so everyone would know that June 20th, 5:30, Falmouth Town Hall. Look forward to seeing you.
When is it? Okay.
I just want to point out there's three problems that no one has discussed yet. Three big problems: traffic, traffic, and traffic. So drive up and down Davis Straits for the next 2 months during the peak hours, you'll see what I mean. So,
The other side of that issue, though, is if it's smart growth, where we're gonna build these someplace else, and then we're just gonna be pushing further and further out, we're trying to stop sprawl.
Trying to integrate some improvements to the traffic. because
Oh, absolutely.
Believe me.
Yeah.
it can
That
be
I
a
agree with.
nightmare.
Well, we are talking, if you look at this, in the Davis Straits program, it talks about smart streets.
In the man report.
Yeah, and the man report, and all those factors are being taken into
Well, sitting
consideration.
here, I'm thinking, what the hell's going on? Because I permitted things on Davis Straits, and all I heard about was
Oh, yeah.
traffic, traffic, and traffic. And
Well, the
somehow
state
we
came and
forget.
presented its plan. Were you there? I'm not sure. There were three of us from the planning board there, John, Paul, and myself, to hear the state presentation on how they're going to improve 28 as it goes through town. Hits what's going to be, you were there, hits the new traffic circle, gets widened out at different points so that the left-hand turns are easier. There's better
Lights at
sidewalks.
Dillingham.
That's one aspect, and the other aspect of the traffic is the Davis Straits plan foresees, I don't know what to call them, lesser roads to either side of Main Street to get some of that traffic off of there.
Well, since I hadn't heard the words, I just
Yeah.
thought I'd
Right.
just stand up and say that historically and today, Davis Straits is a nightmare.
The traffic needs to be dealt with. John, sorry.
I just wanted to remind everybody that if there were 400 apartments approved there on top of a mixed-use development, it could take 40 or 50 years for this to get built
Yeah.
out. We're not talking about
Right.
by 2020, we're going to have 400 apartments, or 300 apartments, or 200 apartments.
Right.
This is a 50-year plan.
But that would also probably solve the affordable, we'd probably get us into the 10% range of,
Only if they were deed restricted.
yeah,
Right. By then, we might have flying cars. Could I go back to this
sure.
question?
That's right, they
about-
have to be deed restricted to do that. We're never gonna get there.
But the more units, the more affordable
Right,
things
right,
become.
you gotta let the market take care of it, sorry.
About the subcommittee on Davis Straits multifamily housing, going forward to meet again with the town employees, bringing to them the draft that we brought to this board to see what their input might be.
Now, when you say town employees, who are you talking about?
Ollie, Sari, Ron, who else was there, Pat?
Carla.
Carla?
Okay.
Yeah, people who'll be involved in
Because,
housing.
no, because you always say downstairs and Cerie's upstairs, I just didn't know what you're talking, you're getting
We
me.
met downstairs.
You're getting
Oh,
me.
I'm sorry.
I don't know when you refer
Okay, I
to.
thought she was downstairs.
No, that's why I was confused.
Ah,
I didn't.
okay. Down
So
and
if you're saying
upstairs.
Ollie and Cerie.
Ollie,
And-
Sari,
and Ron and
Carla.
Carla.
Holly was there, I believe, also, Holly Wilson.
But
I
she's
don't
not a
remember
town
Holly being
employee.
there.
She's a
Holly
committee member.
was not there. She could be, but she wasn't.
Okay, I think we've hit that pretty good.
Great.
Everyone, we all set with
Yeah,
that?
let's move on.
General correspondence, you all are encouraged, there's a letter in the file.
Yeah, we got a copy
You
of it.
got a copy of it?
Yeah.
Okay, you've all read
As
it?
requested, which is great.
Oh, that one, yeah.
Yeah,
Grant
I
Walker.
thought it was fascinating.
Yeah.
Very
Future
interesting.
agenda items, boy, I don't know, we've got a lot. Anyone got anything new? I think I'm all set for
The
agenda.
solar arrays
Yeah,
and
with all the-
TDRs.
With all the stuff we got
Yeah.
lined up. Next meeting, that's the Cape Cod Commission, that's a Wednesday meeting, right?
June 20th.
June 20th, in this room,
Yes, sir.
5:30.
5:30, that's the important thing, and we're gonna get a reminder of that, right?
Does that take the place of our second
In
meeting?
addition to the one I gave tonight,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
there will be other reminders as well, I promise.
Because the change in time can mess you up sometimes, especially if you're real busy and it-
Yeah.
Does that take the place of our second Tuesday?
Just not.
Not? No. So our next regular planning board meeting is,
and that
The 19th.
completes our agenda.
Move to adjourn.
Adjourned.
And you're signing these plans.